understanding of what's going on within treatment or within healing. So I want to present some information to you today and show you live what we do with some of our software to measure emotional arousal. Our focus is to provide quantitative information concerning this qualitative data, such as emotion, provide that to the experts so they can then creatively make interventions with much more effective results. About 40 years ago, this phrase was coined, microexpressions. We have within it expressions that last between 1/10 of a second and 1/25 of a second. It is generally accepted in my field that you have about 80,000 thoughts a day. Of those thoughts, 70% are negative. Michelle Adams, in her recent study, showed that 80% are negative. So as you go on a stream, and your stream is positive, we have this slippery eel we call motivation. It's hard to define because you have an individual that's really excited, they get movement, and all of a sudden, they slow down. So it's the emotional capture we have of understanding what's happening and what could happen through this emotional arousal. We're going to look at the second piece here that we use within our software, that's Russell's model of effect. Many of you know that, and I want to talk over you, but I want to give you a little bit of understanding of what we do here. Emotional arousal, if you split the midline, that's called valence. That's the emotional range from the far left being very unpleasant to the far right being very pleasant. The ring is the extreme emotional impact of that individual at the time. If you look at the top, you'll see the arousal is up top, but at the bottom is what we call dissonance. Dissonance is an individual that can tell you he's emotionally or she's emotionally bound, but not be. It's critical for us to understand that, especially in the treatment module. The validation on this software is about 90%. I'll be honest with you, it's a little over 90, but I'll say at 90. Lewinsky just finished his study 2 years ago and found out that the majority of what we have here is at 90%. We use another software to then quantify to a much greater extent such emotions as anger, which is very difficult, by the way, to define. The second of these software pieces is counterterrorist. We use it not to find psychopaths, but we use it to find a way to help other individuals. So the owner of this and the genius behind it has loaned that to us for 5 years. We're in the 4th year of that 5-year span. So it picks out emotions between about 10,000th of a second. That sounds really good, but in all essence, it's a bells and whistle. If we can't understand those emotions, we can't quantify, we can't give it back to the practitioner to work, because how many of you can split out a thought in 10,000th of a second and quantify it? We can't either. But he has a different way of looking at arousal. Some of those algorithms are similar, so we can look at them and say, are they working? Are they synonymous? And I think I'll show you in just a second they are synonymous. The first software has 8 different emotions. This one takes 13. Some are similar, some are different, but allows us to get a really good picture immediately, and I'll show you how immediate it is, to find out what's going on within that face and the voice. The validity here is over 90%, but we'll just stay at 90% here. That validity recently was shown that those of you that like polygraphs, this is equal to or greater than the validity in a polygraph test. The interesting part about this is we do not use it as a lie detector. We do not confront individuals. When you confront individuals, you get pushback. That's not healing. So we look at how do we get to understand what's going on and be able to work around those areas where they get comfortable, where they can tell us what is happening inside. Deception, and I'll show you in just a second, is when a person truly believes that he or she is at a state of mind but not emotionally connected. It's important for us to understand that because that's where our treatment, that creative treatment, occurs. I have pulled out a video from YouTube about a soldier that just came back from Afghanistan that has PTSD. You will hear him use the term PTSD in a past tense. In other words, he believes he's healed. So let's go ahead and we'll hear the video first of this.
I mean, we help them find a home, or we help them with bills, or we help them with AR, stuff like that. Why don't we just help them by saying, hey, go get help, and instead of having that stigma Because I went through it, and I'm pretty sure like most of my other NCOs, they spread the word about going to get help instead of like hammering. But I would say just being open-minded and having the guys go get help would be defeating the stigma. That's what I would say.
You heard him use the past tense for PTSD. So we're going to see where his emotional arousal is in the comparison of what he felt he is. Go to the next slide. I'm going to click on this in just a second. Just see the gentleman's face, far left. You'll see in the circle, that's the circumplex model of effect. This is understanding arousal. The darker shade you see, and you'll see it come alive in just a second, that's where he's going to spend the majority of his time. We call these swings. By the way, the swing for autism is much different than this. But you'll see where he's going to swing back and forth. Now, I'll ask you to give your opinion here. Where is he if he's resolved this issue of PTSD? If you look at the majority, he's either very sad or he's very angered. I would say the implications are that he has not fully resolved this issue. Down below, you'll see the emotions we capture from the face when we do the analysis. Go ahead and click on it. Brian. This is what we see live time when we take an individual. You can see the snake at the top, we call the snake, that's the emotion that he is incurring at the time. You'll see that he's talking about a very emotional state of mind, but you'll see he's not emotionally connected. This is called emotional dissonance. If we're to treat an individual, the emotions have to be similar to what they feel they're experiencing. Otherwise, the dissonance will continue. Go ahead and click. So let's get into the voice software. This is the real trick stuff that we're using in the counter-terrorist. You'll notice in the first bar here that's upset. He got very upset when he made a statement that he, as a non-comm officer, would send his people to get help. We don't know what that really means. I have to bring him in and analyze him or ask him to quantify that much more depth. But the bottom line is he had an episode here that was very emotional to him when he said he would ask others to get help. You can see the basic flat line we have here. This is called emotional dissonance, again, using the voice to analyze it. You'll see a little blip in the middle. This is really a non-emotional blip, even though it's high. If you take, and we're glad this slide came out a little bit, if you look at the range of about 80 to 100, that's considered a normal emotional response. So even his emotional responses are very mooted at best. Next slide. So let's talk about deception. Again, if you ask the individual where he's at, I will tell you he believes categorically he is completely healed from PTSD. I think I've shown you enough evidence to say there may be implication he is not. So we'd want to go back and tailor that treatment to fit his needs at the time. You do see a blip in the first of these three. It is somewhat common for us to see blips occur, but you'll see that the other two areas that have equal value are flattened. So he's not lying to us. He's not trying to deceive us in any manner. He's telling us he believes what he said to be 100% accurate. We're looking at brain trauma in many different areas. We're doing research starting next month with brain trauma in children. We're looking at those. We'll have an arousal as well with autistic children. The one I'm very excited about, the next two, is working with doctors and their patients, which I'm involved in that at the present time. We're teaching doctors to understand their patients much better, how to talk to their doctors, what questions maybe to ask in the process of finding out what's really going on. Because we ask direct questions, guess what answers we get? The question they think we want us to hear. So trying to teach the practitioner how to get past those sticking points. The other one we have is looking at that third member. Because a lot of times we have individuals that come with us, family members. We talk to a client, patient leaves, on their way home, the other person is saying, no, don't do that. So we're now looking at the other piece of this puzzle, and that is the third member, either a family member or a friend coming in. And then on August 9th, Mayo Clinic comes in. I'm infusing this as part of their medical model for their med school coming up. This will be August 9th. We're also looking at their registered dietitians, the interaction we have with the registered dietitian. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Chisum. I suspect there'll be some people who want to follow up with you throughout the course of the day. I will confess that one of your opening comments, that 80% of our facial expressions are negative, is pretty depressing, all right? But understandable. But thanks. And I guess a reminder that as much as we continue to study the human brain, there's probably more that we don't know than we do know. So thanks for that. So we're going to begin now our afternoon session. I hope you had an opportunity to visit the extraordinary and informative exhibitors next door, and we'll have opportunities throughout the day to do that. Our special presentation now is by Dr. Howard Jacob, Executive Vice President for Genomic Medicine and the Chief Medical Genomics Officer at HudsonAlpha Institute for Biotechnology, where he uses molecular genetics to understand complex multifactorial disease. I understood about 3% of what I just said, but we're very, very pleased that Dr. Jacob is here. Thank you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, General. I hope at the end of this you'll understand much more. So I want to thank you, the military health system. I am a product of the military health system. So all of my health care until I left home was through what you provide. So I want to thank you for that. My father was a Seabee in the Navy, spent 1 year in Vietnam in 1969, deployed with the Marines. And so for those of you that have done multiple tours, thank you for your service. And single tours, thank you for your service. I know what it means. And so I just want to tell you that being here is a privilege. And hopefully I can tell you something that will get you to think a little bit about what else we can offer to those you serve. So a little bit of a background around this. So the human genome was finished about in 2002. It took 10 years and about $1 billion to get the first human genome sequence. It's largely been a research tool. It started to enter into the clinical medicine for cancer, pharmacogenomics, and rare undiagnosed diseases, and I think it has potential for readiness. Now, there's a lot of skepticism around that. I expect every person in here who practices medicine to have big skepticism. I'm going to ask you to just put that aside for a moment. We'll do the video to make sure your face features are in the positive sense here. Just follow that with me, and then we can have a discussion around that afterwards. Now, you think about healthcare all the time. I'm from Huntsville, Alabama, so I was at a presentation recently on the Talos. You're thinking about how do we protect our troops going in the door first? How do we deal with these types of activities? But what other things can we do to help the healthcare? Because keep in mind, everything we do to deploy those troops, or everything you do, a simple illness is enough to sideline everything that you've put in place around that. So what do we think about that? I hate to depress you, but none of your patients have blueprints, and those of you that aren't in the medical profession, none of you have a blueprint either. You would never take your car, bicycle, vacuum cleaner, or anything else to anything to get fixed except for you. And that is a major issue. And because of that, what we do is we treat medicine on average. Okay, so what do I mean by that? As a silly, stupid example, these two individuals, one's a basketball player and the other's a race car driver. You don't have to be a geneticist to figure that out. They both have a headache. What do the directions say? Adults take 2 aspirin. Now, how many of you think Shaq O'Neal should take 2 aspirin? Right? How many of you think Danica Patrick should take 2? Well, it looks like Shaq should take 4, and Danica should take 1. In this silly, stupid example, we have over-medicated one individual, and we have under-medicated one individual, and we do this every single day across medicine. This is not picking on physicians. There's a lot of you in the room, those of you that practice medicine. This is about the data we give you. So the point is, what if you actually had a blueprint around that? There's only about 6 million variants that distinguish these two individuals, but those variants have a massive impact on the phenotypes that we see. So what would the value be? So I'm going to take you through a journey of how you provide healthcare from your dependents through potentially what you could do in the future. So the cost to train and maintain, this is what I've got off the internet. I have no idea how accurate this type of information is. So it looks like it's about $500,000 to train one of your special force individuals, and between $1 million and $2 million to keep them deployed. And what it says is it's not just that, it's everything else that you provide around them. And healthcare is a major issue around that, as you well know, which is why you're all here. And it's also looking like the costs are going up. So if we think about that, what's the cost of generating a blueprint relative to the cost that you do for maintaining these troops, trying to get them in place, and having everything available? So I'm going to show you a little video that talks a little bit about genomic medicine, and I'm going to get into some detail afterwards. So these are from patients and people that have been involved. So if you'd start that, please.
Genomic medicine is one of the most exciting programs I've ever been involved with. And here at HudsonAlpha, we're really pushing the boundaries with what we're doing in this program. What's notable are actually two pieces of it. One is our rare disease program over at the Smith Family Clinic. There we see adults and children who've gone from physician to physician around the country and have been unable to figure out what the cause of their disease is.
She never really had medical issues like, heart problems or anything that you would link together with a genetic condition. I can remember she was probably about 5 months old, and I was looking at speech charts, and I was thinking, oh, she should be making more sounds by now. She's 5 years old. I know it's not a delay anymore. I mean, this is a full-blown disorder. The teachers had told me, if you don't get a better diagnosis, we're going to label her as intellectual disability.
And this is, I think, a very clear example of the value of genetic testing and really how it can end the diagnostic odyssey for a lot of these families.
And our goal is to use the power of DNA sequencing, of whole genome sequencing, essentially looking at every piece of a child's genetic code. And we try to find genetic explanations for the symptoms that the child is dealing with.
They found that a specific gene had a mutation that correlates with Cornelia-de-Lange syndrome. 2 of my 3 children have a condition called cytosterolemia, and it is a condition where you hyperabsorb sterols from the food you eat, both plant sterols and animal sterols, cholesterol. We have this great resource in our backyard, Smith Family Clinic, and I thought, why am I not doing that? So we decided to go ahead and have, even though we knew it was supposed to be a mutation on the ABCG8 gene causing cytosterolemia, I wanted confirmation.
Well, we've actually developed a program called the Insight Program. And in this program, anyone, even if you don't have a medical indication for testing, can have a look in their own genome.
My family has a history of heart attack. The one thing you cannot get away from is heredity. And so, 8 years ago, at 52 years old, I also had a heart attack. The one thing you cannot get away from is heredity. And so, 8 years ago, at 52 years old, I also had a heart attack.
Okay, well, let's, for the sake of time, we'll just go past it. So the point of General Collier is that he was actually having the wrong medications. He was taking 2 medications that actually were not helping him after he had a heart attack. We go on to show another example of a patient who was at risk for ALS, and we're able to show that this patient was not at risk for ALS. So the point of this is this is available today inside a clinical environment. So back in 2005, about when a child would come in for rare undiagnosed disease, they had about a 5% probability of getting a diagnosis. In 2010, we sequenced the first child, Nicholas Volker, and showed that if you use genomic sequencing, you could actually solve that problem. We were criticized for being cavalier and cowboy in nature because we're using a research technology of sequencing. It's now shown that we're about 45% of the time, the field is now making a medical diagnosis by using this information. So the point of this is that we're now at a point of practicing medicine around that. In rare undiagnosed disease, it's a medical definition, which means there's less than 200,000 cases that exhibit this. Inside your healthcare system, you are for sure seeing this. About 10% of your population, and I will show you that I'm not making this up, the facts are out there, that this is out there all the time, and you just don't see it. Why don't you see it? Well, you don't see it because the medical presentation is not what you're used to. There's something unusual. Every physician in this room has cases where it doesn't exactly fit what it is, and the consequences in pediatrics is huge. 35% of deaths within the first year, and up to 28% of your healthcare dollars are being spent on these types of diseases. So there's something that can be done around that, which is using genomic sequencing. So we do whole genome sequencing as part of our clinical environment. And the other thing that I think is important is we actually practice medicine with this. So we're part of the Undiagnosed Disease Network. We do the whole genome sequencing for this NIH program. And we're showing that we thought we would be able to increase diagnosis rate above whole exome sequencing, which the military is using in many cases, by 25%. We're actually beating it by 37%. Sequencing and being able to come up with undiagnosed diseases for intellectual disability. So I thought this was the hardest thing you could possibly do. We've diagnosed 150 in our local community out of 400 families. It's a massive change in how we think about practicing medicine around this. So we also do practice medicine. So we have a clinic where we actually see patients. How do we figure out how to get this data to a physician? How do we deliver it in a time frame for which a physician can practice medicine? So we know this works for rare undiagnosed diseases. These are many people that have been helped, not all just by our clinic, some from some other clinics around the world, and there's been some profound changes. So you'll be shocked to know that about 50% of the time it affects care. You're saying, well, you're not curing them 50% of the time. No, but we're stopping trial and error. We're stopping the giving of the wrong medications, using the expensive biologics in order to do this. So the Exceptional Family Program is a place that we think is very interesting from a clinical perspective. The military is forward thinking about this. How do we make sure that the troops are deployed in the right places where the families get what they need? Interesting number. I told you 10% of the population has rare undiagnosed disease. 12% of your dependents and your military activities actually fit in this program. I don't think that's coincidental. In fact, if we look at the numbers around this, you'll find that many of these things do have a direct relationship. So if that's true, why aren't physicians using this? Why is this something that people are afraid to use? Well, for your clinic, it does matter. Well, why does it matter? Well, the Institute of Medicine 2 years ago reported that 5% of diagnoses that are made are errors. So every physician makes 62 misdiagnoses per year. Again, I'm not criticizing the physician, I'm criticizing the information we give the physician to be able to practice better care. There's 5 steps in the process. Here's the big challenge. The pre-analytical, and analytical, post-analytical, and post-analytical is all what the physician has to do around this. So why would this be so hard? Well, it turns out that how do you pick the right tests? There's about 80,000 different places you can get gene tests from. Which gene test do you pick? Which company do you use? How do you deploy that information? So the task of selecting this is almost impossible. How do you come up with that in your time window with being able to see the patients? Choosing the appropriate test requires you to understand the patient history, but do you really understand the patient history? And it's a big factor. It causes 10% of deaths and up to 17% of admissions. And in the private sector, it's the #1 cause for malpractice. So this is from the Institute of Medicine. But the Institute of Medicine also says that molecular diagnostic testing is going to be better. You're going to be able to change the practice of medicine around this. You're going to be able to really do a much better job with having this. So that's the promise. Idiopathic nature. Many of your cases, as I showed you, are going to fall into this knowledge gap where you can take a look at this. And the Institute of Medicine defines diagnostic error then as establishing an accurate, timely explanation and communicating that. So this is a challenge every physician group has. And the challenge is as simple, is that when you make a diagnosis and the outcome is unfavorable, you recalibrate. But when you don't know that you've actually made a mistake or the patient hasn't improved, you actually don't change this. You maintain your calibration. And that's a problem as we think about how do we move forward. So here's an example of one of our employees' sons, Sam. Sam is with the cane. His mom works for HudsonAlpha in the red shirt. He was misdiagnosed in 2001 for having some type of an immune disease. He took intravenous IgG for 11 years. which cost about $3 million and actually made him sicker. When we went and read his genome, it turns out he has Charcot-Marie tooth disease. And I know the physician who made this diagnosis or missed this diagnosis. This physician's really, really good. He didn't have the right presentation, so there wasn't anything wrong with that. Here's data from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, which is not a big fan of this as a concept. So what we're looking at here is a ratio of disease cost. So where you see this line in the lower black line, that's an incidence of 1. That's your risk factor. Everything below that, and you look at the dollars on the bottom, everything you look below that is what's called low risk, high expense. This is 10% of Alabama state that actually is showing these low risk, high costs. There's people in here that you're paying $100,000, $50,000, $75,000 per year to treat a case for which you don't know what's wrong with them. It costs $6,500 to sequence a genome. So it just illustrates the point. Blue Cross Blue Shield didn't believe that this actually was sitting inside their cohort. And I promise you, inside the military dependents and inside your active forces, you're seeing the same thing. So how do you move this information forward? Well, better care. You can end a diagnostic odyssey. In the case of Nick Volker, the first child we treated, $7 million went into this child, removed his colon, did everything wrong. We kept the child alive, but we actually didn't know that he had a single base mutation, a gut disease that was treated by cord blood transplant, something you wouldn't find in the medical literature. Informed decision. Instead of doing a liver transplant to a child that was going to die of a neurological disease, the child didn't get the liver. The liver went to another child, and that child would have died anyway. So how do you manage this? How do you look at this? From an economic point of view, it's pretty clear. But you know what mom said? For the child that died, at least I know it's not my fault. These are real instances that happen. Inappropriate care. Here's a case of 3 children that were going to be put on exubumab at $600,000 per child per year. We read their genome and found out this drug would never work for them. Preventative care. When you read a genome, you find out things you didn't know were going to happen and exist. It's a benefit around that. Delayed treatment. This is one of our kids. Went through metabolic screen, everything looked fine, started missing milestones. Turns out completely treatable if we had read her genome. All she needed was a nutrient. But the manifestation clinically didn't show it that way. So the ROI on this is massive, and we continue to have to push to get people to think about this. So if we think about this, here's cost. This is how we think about medicine. Look at these costs. So Crestor, it's about $3,500 for a dose of Crestor. $24,000 for looking at a drug, looking at CV scans, looking at MRIs. The way we practice medicine now, it's a spot test. You spend this amount of money to confirm a diagnosis or to make sure you're not incorrect. What if you did one genetic test for the rest of the patient's life? In healthcare, in the military, many of these people you have 40, 50 years in your system when you count the VA. What's the economics around that? So in terms of whole exome versus whole genome, the military is paying in some instances for looking at whole exome. What we're finding is a 50% increase in all of this by doing whole genome. It's a value proposition that's quite high. So it's one test that for the rest of a patient's life. You can reanalyze it. We're showing that every year we're increasing a diagnosis rate by 11% versus Baylor, who we're partners with and part of the undiagnosed disease that are only doing exome. They're increasing by 5%. Why? Well, you have more data. Guess what? You find more things. An exome sequence is 1.5% of the genome. A whole genome is 98% of the genome. It's a different data volume around that in pharmacogenomics. So everybody worries about a variant of uncertain significance. There's so many variants. What do you do with all this information? So it's critical to find this when you read in the literature. In research, we talk about it as being millions of variants. I told you Shaq and Danica differ between 4 and 5 million variants. But when we put in a clinical report that there's a variant of uncertain significance, it is not millions of data points. It is because the laboratory director and the physician thinks this is important. So you can do this. You can manage this type of information. It's slightly higher, but it's not complicated. Here's the report from one patient. We give 3 pieces of data: the primary diagnosis, the secondary diagnosis, and the pharmacogenomics. The bottom paragraphs in each one of these is all you need to know as a physician. This is manageable, and we practice medicine with this every day. So we're trying to figure out how do we get more people to use this. And guess what? People say it's not being covered. Well, it's not covered at the level I'd like it to be, but there are 30 million Americans now, depending on what state they live in, who their insurance carriers are, that are getting this paid for. And again, the military is doing some of this work for exome sequencing. So in summary, we do know that whole genome sequencing has a value proposition for these very expensive cases that are a big impact in your pediatrics program. And you have a lot of kids that you're taking care of out there. So this is a big impact. So what about screening for cancer? Well, so we were asked several years ago, what if we, by Mary Claire King, who found a BRCA1, BRCA2 genes, what if we screened all 30-year-olds for free? What would we find? And I was not so big of a fan on this because this was going against standard of care, but we decided we would try this. So why would you look at 30? Well, a woman diagnosed at 30, this is your survival age rate by age. If you're diagnosed at 30, that is your lowest probability of surviving versus the other years that come along. And inside your healthcare system, you cover this continuum when you count the VA and you cover dependencies from people that retire inside the military. So what we found was 26% of those that we tested, so we've surveyed about 2,100 people. We found 26% of those that were positive, 66 women are positive, 26% of those had no family history, 0 family history. And you say, well, how can that be? Were there males in the family? Or they're small family sizes? Or they just don't share information? 31% have some family history but would not qualify for genetic screening. Some strong family history, no surprise there. That's what you'd expect. And 2% that are unknown family history. You say, well, how can you have an unknown family history? Those are called adoptees, right? So there's a lot of those people out there that you don't tend to think about. So what does this mean? What this means is 59% of the women that we found positive would have discovered they had breast cancer when they had breast cancer. That is a big number. And if you think about this from a treatment perspective, what would be the impact financially of these 66 women not going through breast cancer and being detected when they find it? Well, here's an example. Here's a family in Huntsville. Mom had BRCA1. She's the grandmother. The mother is it would be on your right. She had the screen as well. And so she decided after a year and a half that she would then get her breasts removed. And in removing those breasts, there was precancerous cells that were sitting there. The economics of doing that test, not to mention the healthcare benefits for her, is huge. Her daughter doesn't have this. So here's an example around that. So what could this mean for the military, and how do we think about this stuff? Every stage 1, stage 2, which is the most common type that you get at about 53% of the time, every time you move that up, you save $26,000. Not to mention, you reduce the risk of getting breast cancer to the level of an average woman that doesn't have heritability around that. So if we then take a look at all these women that we found, 85% would have gotten breast cancer. It costs about $5 million if every one of these women decided to have a radical mastectomy and to have an ovarectomy, which most won't do all that. Which means at the end of the day, it would save the healthcare system about $1.2 million just with these 66 women. Okay? So we screened 2,100 women to do this. This level of testing would have actually been economical for 5,900 women. So I'm just going to ask some questions. How do we think about this? So inside the military, you're looking at breast cancer. It's a major initiative. You've been funding this for a while. So I'm just going to ask you. I don't know the answer to this. Do all the women who actually have breast cancer actually get the genetic test? What's the percentage of women that don't get that? And this can have a big impact around that. So pharmacogenomics, you're familiar with this. There's 4 different ways you can have an outcome. The drug's toxic but beneficial. The drug's toxic but not beneficial. The drug's not toxic and beneficial, and the drug's not toxic and not beneficial. So this happens in every single drug that you give. And you're going to be shocked as I show you some numbers around this. So the FDA says that there's about 2 million serious adverse drug reactions. The FDA doesn't capture this information. This is not captured, but based on the estimate from the FDA, there's 100,000 deaths in the United States per year due to this effect. And in fact, it's the 4th leading cause of death if you factor this in. That's a major issue that can be resolved around this. So the FDA says 7% of the drugs out there should be actually tested genetically, and we almost don't use that. And most of you say, well, 7%, who cares about 7%, right? But 18% of drugs prescribed in this country actually have a genetic test that isn't used, and it has a massive impact. This is a shocking number. On this slide, the blue people are the people that benefit from taking that medication. The red people are the number of people that we pay to take that medication. We actually know that these are not working. So how do we move this to a point where you should take that medication? So here's our clinic advisor. She's actually done pharmacogenetics testing. And what she found is she has anxiety. The medication she was taking for anxiety was not working. And based on the pharmacogenomics, she changed it, and now she's taking the right medication. Leslie has breast cancer. She got the breast cancer screening, and it didn't show what the cause was. She's estrogen receptor positive. The only drug for that is tamoxifen. Her pharmacogenomics says she's a triple metabolizer of tamoxifen. She would have gotten 1/3 of the active dose. It costs $200 to do that pharmacogenetics test for 80 common drugs. And you know what else happened? When she had her mastectomy, she had tremendous amounts of pain. You know why? Because she's a triple metabolizer of morphine. And there's a lot of your troops out there that are triple metabolizers of morphine. And that is what you're going to use on the battlefield. So you want to know my future? Sounds scientific, sounds freaky, sounds like it's not possible. So how many of you in this audience think family history is important? I'm just curious. Please raise your hand if you think it's important. How many of you think it's not important? Okay. How many of you actually practice National Family History Day? How many of you even know there's a National Family History Day? So in 2004, the Surgeon General said, Thanksgiving Day is National Family History Day, and you should talk about your health care. Nobody talks about their health care. Nobody. And you just all raised that that's an important piece of information. So when you take a family history, it's largely useless because the data's lousy. But what if you actually had somebody's genome? It actually works. It has attention to it. So how many of you think salt can cause high blood pressure? Come on, how many of you think salt can cause high blood pressure? How many think it can't? Well, it turns out that epidemiologically, salt has no impact. Salt increases 1.1 millimeters of mercury. You all are treating troops, many African Americans and Latinos, that actually reducing salt decreases blood pressure. How's that possible? Because on average, medicine is about on average. So the effect sizes of these genes you're not using clinically, the effect size of those genes is larger than the effect size of reducing salt. And you do this all the time. It's available, it's possible, it's all over the genome. What does this have to do with this? Well, you're thinking about force preparedness. I enjoyed the conversations this morning, so I thought I'd slide this in. Genetic performance. There's all kinds of things around that. Is it fantasy land? Is it really something that we can do? Or how much of this really is genetic? How about when we add in the factors around that and we start thinking about injury and so forth? You know what? There's 239 genes that have been mapped onto the human genome. They're involved in performance and health-related fitness phenotypes. And you can go find this in the literature. Injury reduced by 44% using genetics. You have injuries all the time. How do you bring those troops back online? The same way you do all the other troops. You treat them the same way. They are not the same. Their genome is valuable. You spend a lot of money getting them what they need to be safe. What if they had a blueprint? So we've started thinking about that. We've in the process of doing this. So we actually record thousands of variants and we bring this to bear. So I'm going to show you some of my data. So I don't have a problem with sharing my data. So I have some lipid issues. Okay, and here's the different genes. The next two slides, wherever you see an orange or a yellow, is a risk gene that I have, okay, for lipid problems. So I have a fair number of these across the genes. This is way more in depth than the lipid panels that you do, and my lipids are off. Okay, and you say, well, that's simple, Howard. We're just going to put you on a cholesterol-lowering drug, right? No problem, we can deal with that. Except, in addition to clopidogrel, which is a drug you take after a medication after you've had a heart attack, which I don't metabolize. So you give me this drug after a heart attack, it doesn't do me any good. Simvastatin, a major drug that's often used in first line. I actually don't use that drug appropriately. You give me that drug, I will not reduce my cholesterol levels or my lipid levels to a medically noticeable number. You're going to think I'm non-compliant. What else do we know about this? Well, combat, there's stressful environments around this. You all know this better than I do, so we use a combination of drugs. Are your warriors getting the best drug at the right dose? So in my case, this one single base that I have the wrong metabolizing enzyme. The number one drug, tricyclic antidepressant, that I would take does not work for me. This is the most common drug that you guys are prescribing out this for this. Does that work for your soldiers? You can know this. You don't have to ask the question, come back in 3 months, we'll see how you're doing. Sometimes that 3 months is too long. So pain. I mentioned about this before. I am a triple metabolizer of pain. 2 weeks ago, I was in the ER with my second kidney stone. It was not a good day. But I told my physician, do not give me an opioid because it doesn't work for me. And he listened, and it was way better than the last time I had a kidney stone. So we're talking about trying to build a healthcare economy in Huntsville, Alabama. We're fortunate to have Redstone Arsenal there, and we're trying to figure out how do we do this. The military is a massive healthcare economy. You touch millions of lives across the whole continuum. If you were to sequence every genome, I'm not saying it's economical to do that, across your force, it's less than $200 a year for having a blueprint for your troops. It's something to think about as you go down the road. So in conclusion then, whole genome sequencing, it is doable for your exceptional family program. You have rare undiagnosed diseases sitting in that program today that could be better treated. I promise you that. It could play a role in force readiness and preparedness. Genomic information is a fraction of the cost of what you're doing to try to get these troops to be healthy and to get them out there and have them safe. What if you actually had a blueprint? You could put it across the whole system. And it requires development. It's not a test to show that it's got medical utility. That's been demonstrated. The point is, how do you deploy it? And many of you say, well, there's these papers that are coming out. One just came out in the Annals of Medicine that said they did 50 cases with primary care providers. They didn't find anything. You know why? They didn't look at anything of relevance. Hopefully I've stimulated some thought. Thank you for your attention. So the question is, are you partnering with non-governmental agencies to look for family-related illness? Yes, we are. We're looking at many non-government agencies. We're trying to work with healthcare systems around this and different hospital systems to come in and use it. You know, it's a tough fight because insurance companies don't want to pay for this right now. So outside of those 30 million Americans that are funded to do this, it's a self-pay. But we have had over 1,000 people self-pay because it's an added value for them to come in and use that information. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Dr. Jacob. Hey, could I ask you before you walk too far away? So if somebody's interested in self-pay, what's the cost? $6,500. So if you won the lottery last night, you know, then see Dr. Jacob and you'll get hooked up. Pete's here, so let's stand up and take a stretch break while we assemble our next panel, please. Now, just, you know, per usual, I'll just introduce you and let you introduce them.
Yeah, we already worked that. Okay. He's got a formatting.
Okay. There you go, that's right.
How's things been, sir?
Good, good. We get everybody, or we're missing one?
We're missing Colonel Shu, the doctor. We can go, sir.
All right. Okay, Michael, we all right? Okay, if we could reassemble, we'll get started here with our first panel for the afternoon. Okay, thank you very much. And once again, Dr. Jacob, thanks for a very interesting presentation. I think he'll be around, and for those of you who may want to have some follow-up questions. Our first panel for this afternoon is titled The Human Dimension, Optimizing Performance and Cognitive Advantage. Our panel chair for this afternoon's panel is Colonel Mike McGurk, United States Army retired, who is the Director, Research and Analysis Directorate at the United States Army Center for Initial Military Training at U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. And our panel moderator is well known to those of us at AUSA, and we look forward again to Brigadier General Retired Pete Palmer from Strategic Advisory at Cerego LLC. So Pete, off to you. Thank you very much.
And it's great to be here. For those that might not know, over 10 years ago, we in TRADOC, we were standing up an organization called ARCIC then, and we decided that we had all kinds of concept documents on all our stuff and how to do offense and defense, and then we figured out, well, maybe the human is important too. So we started a concept document called the Human Dimension, and for those familiar with bureaucracy, you have to have a concept documents to get the requirements, to get the budgeting, to get the acquisition RFP, to actually get a capability. All of that is really accelerated nowadays. I'm kidding. But the point is we've been working this for 10 years, and I think what you're going to see with the panel here is really great initiatives as we've matured it, and actually 10 years is not a long time when we're talking this kind of capability development. So I'd like to introduce Colonel Mike McGurk. He is going to go into the briefing, and then he will talk about the integration of all the other participants on the panel as we go to try to advance this thing called human dimension and optimizing performance.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Michael McGurk. I am the Director of Research at IMT, as they said. And for those of you who don't know what we do, it's my boss would say, the doorway to the Army. So everybody that comes to the Army goes to initial military training, be you a private, a warrant officer, an officer, 120, 140,000 people a year through basic training and AIT. In addition to that, we're tasked with being in charge of physical fitness for the United States Army. And we're the proponents for FM 722. Which is being rewritten right now to be called Holistic Health and Fitness. Next slide. Hey, real quickly to kind of frame the discussion here, the best way is probably the Army Campaign Plan for 2017 has strategic effect number 7, Holistic Health and Fitness. And if you look up there, you'll see there's 7 lines of effort. Improving soldier screening selection process, soldier physical performance, medical readiness deployability, mental health, soldier fitness, performance education, and civilian health care. And TRADOC, CIMT, where I work, is working on numbers 1, 2, 5, and 6 there. And the rest of our panel here is assisting us in all our efforts and additionally working as lead on some of the other efforts. So as we go down the panel here, what we'll hear from first is 2 OTSG representatives talking about how OTSG is supporting holistic health and fitness. Then we'll hear from Tim Higdon from IMCOM, talking about how IMCOM is supporting the community and the environment where our soldiers are. And then Command Sergeant Major Gregg from CIMT will talk about 2 programs initially here that are already rolled out and starting to work for us. And then we'll wrap it up and take your questions. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Colleen.
Hello, my name is Colonel Colleen Shaw. I'm an endodontist, so it's something different, but I came to P3 because I got to the point in my life I thought, you know what, I need to learn how to integrate this for myself. And I think P3 starts not only with, it starts with self, and then it goes to units, it's families, so it really, you leverage P3 information in all aspects of your life. So what is P3? P3 is about strengthening the health and the welfare as well as the readiness of the forces. And the 3 components are sleep, activity, nutrition, as you know. Those are rather simple, but they aren't easy to operationalize. So how do we use sleep, activity, and nutrition and operationalize it as a resource to create more combat force and as well as improve performance and improve cognitive performance. Across here, you can see, oh, next slide, 2 more slides, please, sorry. You can see we are trying to synchronize the human performance optimization across all these domains, and whether it's Army G1, ARD, Army Resiliency Directorate, whether it's FORSCOM, TRADOC, CIMT, IMCOM, AXIM, the Military Academy, PME, et cetera, et cetera. This is where our efforts are to synchronize with all entities here. How do we operationalize sleep activity and nutrition as foundational to readiness as well as increased performance capability? Next slide, please. So I'm sure you've all seen this target card. What I like about the target card is it's simple. What I like about P3, it's simple for soldiers to understand. And then each unit and each individual can take what they need and their challenge and try to incorporate it into their life, as we all have different requirements. So a aviation unit, they already know how to do sleep management, but perhaps infantry doesn't quite operationalize it. We have tools and other resources that units can utilize to incorporate this to operationalize it, et cetera. And that's found on the performancetriad.mil website. That will go live 1 September. All of our resources are there. One moment. Additionally, obviously, this is getting at human performance. The Army has significant challenges with less than optimal performance in all of these 3 areas that we have on the right-hand side of the slide, in addition to others. So it's really addressing this. Next slide, please. So in 2014 and 15, the System for Health, OTSG, performed a FORSCOM pilot for P3, and these are 2 of the positive findings. And you may say 15 minutes of sleep over a 6-month period is not really that much, and 1.5 more servings of fruits and vegetables a day is not that much. But in reality, if most of your soldiers and service members are 18 to 25 years old, it is that much. And what I want to tell people is, on the bottom it says leadership matters, and that's probably the most important thing that we found. If leaders believe in it and leaders model the sleep and activity, nutrition behaviors, so will service members. It's no different than we modeled our parents' behaviors, we model our teachers' behaviors, our peers' behaviors, we model our leaders' behaviors too. And this is just an anecdote, this is a story, but sometimes they say, well, oh really, this isn't that big of a deal. When I first came into the military, I was stationed in Heidelberg, Germany. We still treated World War I, World War II vets, and I would look in their mouths, I'm a dentist, I would look in their mouths and they would have these crowns that were as beautiful as the day they were put in. These gold inlays, onlays, and crowns. And what they would tell me is I never brushed my teeth, I didn't even know how to do it, I never went to the dentist, but a dentist or a hygienist taught me how to do it. And so what I tell, whether it's dentists or in this topic, you don't know when the light bulb is going to go off with this information that we're providing soldiers. This is knowledge, and people are going to incorporate it when they feel they need to incorporate it. So just like the person who the light bulb went off and they do brush and floss, this is the same type of information. Next, please. So, oops, okay, so this is from the pilot also, no, this wasn't from the pilot, but from an armored BCT, a brigade, an infantry brigade chose to use sleep as their P3 sleep challenge when they went to Table 6 gunnery. And so they didn't perform all that well the previous year, so they chose sleep as their challenge. And what they did was 2 weeks ahead of time, they were educated. The company was educated. They also then started 2 weeks ahead of time sleep banking. With that education, it's getting as much sleep as you possibly can, having sleep hygiene, being aware of lights and external influences, not doing PT right before you go to bed, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, they did reverse cycle PT. So they did PT at 1600. They reported for duty day at 0900. Now all of us say, ooh, 0900. But what that really allowed them to do was, it allowed them to, they got breakfast in the morning, whether they went to the DFAC or they stayed home with their family. That creates less stress. They felt well rested. Our young service members, their circadian rhythm doesn't allow them to fall asleep before 1100 hours, so it allows them to get that 7-8 hours sleep, and they come to work ready to work. So the point is that they found that sleep was a tool that they could use, and that they found that sleep banking was the fastest way to improve their performance. So the next slide yes, this one. The next slide is simply where the System for Health and P3 is integrated into these different domains: sleep, activity, nutrition, spiritual, and healthy armed communities, and your environment, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where we support the holistic health and fitness as the P3 effort. Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Timothy Higdon, who's going to talk about how in this overall concept, not only is it focused on just the military, but it's also focused on the military environment and the community that IMCOM provides for us. Tim?
Good afternoon, everyone. Tim Higdon, IMCOM G9, Family and MWR, Healthy Army Communities. Just a privilege to be here today and to share with all of you about Healthy Army Communities. Next slide. And one more. There we go. Just a quick, simple vision and mission, and hopefully these will be available to you if you need them a little bit later down the line. But at the end of the day, we're just looking for the Army community at all levels to be mission ready, healthy, and resilient. Next slide. Here you can see a model that we've developed. We see for a Healthy Army communities, it needs to impact every aspect of it. So you can see that we've got culture change, we've got activity, healthy eating, and that's all needs to be supported by an environment that allows for that. And by doing that, we see then an increase in recruitment, retention, and resilience overall. But it's really more than just soldiers. Healthy Army Communities is just that. It's about the community. So it's about soldiers, family members, retirees, civilians, the entire total Army family. And so we're really pleased that we're working with our Army enterprise stakeholders to start focusing on that and coming together and synergizing efforts. Next slide. And just as you can see here, these are just some of the key stakeholders that have been involved in the last 2 years over this new commitment that IMCOM has kind of stood up and taking the lead for. And we're just so pleased that the Exchange and DECA, APHC and MedCom, many of you in this room are even a part of this. Working with the Joint Center of Culinary Excellence there with Army G4 and what we're doing with Go for Green and the dining facilities, and just overall, partners coming together, having the conversation, and we're at the point now where it's about action and what can we do next to improve the overall health of our communities. Next slide. Starting here in 2018, the calendar year, we'll be looking to kick off some innovation demonstrations. We've identified 8 garrisons across the Army enterprise, 2 from each IMCOM directorate here in CONUS, and then 1 from each in Pacific and Europe, where we're going to focus with our stakeholders on what can we do to improve the environment. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But we're excited about those 8 garrisons and the different populations that they represent. The population at each of those bases, whether a TRADOC or a Forces Command or an AMC garrison, have a different population group, so they have different needs and different requirements. And so we'll be looking at how can we across the board address some of those concerns and issues and come together as a team to make some impact. You will see that there's 2 garrisons there in blue, Fort Meade and Fort Sill. They were involved with DoD's Healthy Base Initiative, and it's really because of their success and their involvement in the Healthy Base Initiative that we kind of stood up Healthy Army Communities. And so they'll be working alongside of us with these 8 new garrisons as we look to try some of these new innovations and demonstrations that we're going to do. Next slide. So this is really where the fun, exciting stuff happens, and I keep telling everyone, Healthy Army Communities doesn't do anything. We're just trying to provide some emphasis and focus on what everybody else is already doing. And so we're just, like I said, excited that we have partners at the table who are willing to put in the time and the resources to help make some of these changes. And so just to kind of go around the list there, some of the pictures that you see there, the healthy grab-and-go options and partnerships. Working with Army G4 and JCCOE and Army Sustainment Command and going, hey, we've got fitness centers that aren't in close proximity to dining facilities. What if the dining facilities prepared boxed breakfast and had them provided to the fitness center so that a SIK soldier could work out in the morning, grab breakfast while they're there, as opposed to choosing work out or go eat breakfast. So it's just simple things like that where we can work together and partner. Excited about the 25% that MWR is ponying up for. They're going to change and make a requirement that 25% of all menu items on our MWR food outlets have to meet a health requirement of 500 calories or less, 40% total fat or less, or 10% saturated fat or less. And we've already developed over 50 new recipes that meet that criteria that have been tested and have already been pushed out to the field. And so as part of these innovation demonstrations, we'll be looking to lock that in, start tracking that, looking at cost of goods and the overall performance of it. But we realize as stakeholders that we all need to start aligning and coming together. It's great that we have Go for Green for the dining facilities, but what are we doing for the family members, the civilians, and the retirees that are a part of our community? They have to have healthy choice too. And so it's really about that, making the healthy choice the easy choice. Colonel Scholl was just talking about performance triad, and our stakeholders agreed full-heartedly that the foundational elements for every person in our total Army family is those three pillars of sleep, activity, and nutrition. And everybody needs to have the opportunity to make good choices, to make improvements in those areas. And it's really about holding each other accountable as stakeholders for the Army to do our own part to come together and support that. So there's just some other things there. We've got some new measurement tools with the MPAC and the MNEAT that we're working with APHC on. Again, you have some great team members that belong to MedCom that are helping us along the way as we're doing this, and we're excited about that. Go for Green 2.0, new healthy recipes with Natick Labs, so that we can have some vegetarian and vegan options available in our dining facilities as well, and things like that. Vending is a huge thing that we see trying to innovate here in some of these garrisons. The exchange is committed to, at these garrisons, to raise from 15% to 50% items in the vending machines will be healthy items that meet our criteria. And in some cases, we'll be looking to implement 100% healthy item vending machines as well. And again, none of this is groundbreaking, going to change the world in a day type things, but they're each one little step that just, again, makes the healthy choice the easy choice. Next slide. At the end of the day, we want our Army garrisons to be a healthy place. We want it to be a choice that people make. They want to be a part of our communities. They want to be a part of our garrison. You want to come and be assigned at this base because it's a part of a healthy Army community. And so we're excited about everybody working together and making that happen. And again, we're just looking forward to how we can support holistic health and fitness and how we can come together and partner all of this as we all look to do our part to make our Army the most ready and resilient that it can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Tim will be followed by Command Sergeant Major Michael Gregg to talk a little bit more about holistic health and fitness, what it is. It's a fairly new term. It's been out for a couple years now. We've been using it, some more details, and then something that will interest probably everybody in this room, the OPAT and the Army Combat Readiness Test. Sergeant Major.
Thank you. Is it already on? Can you hear me? The little green light's not on, so I'm used to the little green light. So this afternoon, I'll start my briefing with talking about why we attack some of these things. So, one of the first charges that we got at IMT was to attack attrition. So, to give you an overview of attrition, so we are, on average, costs about $68,000, $72,000 to get a soldier or a trainee from front door of their house to the first unit of assignment. So when we start looking at the money that it costs to invest in an individual to get them from their doorstep to your doorstep, the chief gave us a mission. We have to decrease costs because every dollar that we spend on a soldier in the training environment is money that we can't spend in an operational environment. And of course, we all have constrained budgets. So when we start looking at the numbers and start talking to USAREC, and USAREC tells us that, hey, it takes 16 million contacts to get 65,000 contracts. Of those 65,000 contracts, only 60,000 are going to show up at basic training. And then of those individuals that are in basic training, previous to implementation of some of our stuff, about 12% of them were going to a Triad out before they even completed basic training. And then on top of that, then we go into the first UA with an additional 25% we're going to a Triad out. So we're looking at about 33% were going to a Triad and not complete their first contract. So those numbers just drove us to try to figure out a way to try to prevent some of our attrition in the training base. So next slide, please. So that is a overview of holistic health and fitness there. What we're trying to do with holistic health and fitness is we're trying to give a overarching program to Army Fitness. We're taking the PT manual as it is right now, physical readiness training, and changing the title, rewriting it to add it to a holistic health and fitness paradigm, and add in the P3 principles, add in some recovery principles, add in some sports performance coaching principles so that individuals have a program to design the entire training program for an individual, not necessarily for the unit itself. Along with that, in teaming with MCOM, is building the gyms and changing the name from gyms to making them a training platform so that individuals will look at it as a training platform and put it on their training schedules as a training platform. So those entities don't go empty, because right now, you know, the gym that we have is busy from 06 to 9, and then from 11 to about 1300, and then maybe 1700 to 1900, and the rest of the time it sits vacant. What we're looking at is repurposing those facilities and making those training facilities, and removing some of those items that are recreational, like racquetball and basketball courts. Nothing wrong with them, but they're just not the training platforms that we need, and repurposing that space and putting in sports performance coaching, nutrition, the PT individuals, so that units would go there, and then the individuals in the units would be able to go to the exercises or the activities that they need to get them healthy in the process. In teaming with MCOM right now, there's approximately 5 installations and about 8 gyms that we're going to be able to do this with changing the name from the gym to a fitness training facility and try to incorporate some of these principles into it. Next slide, please. So this is the overall guidance that we're putting on FM 722, change it to holistic health and fitness. The governance portion through surveillance, and personnel through character, and then the programs where we put in the dietitians, the physical therapists, the sleep, the P3 principles, the mental skills, the coaching, and of course the facilities that we're working with MCOM with, and then the leadership, which is prime to all of this, because if the leaders aren't engaged, then all of this is for naught. We talk about it constantly about we can write and come up with the best policies in the world, but if the policies, if the principles in place aren't codified in policy and then followed with leadership, then we've wasted all our time. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we talked about is the OPAT. So the OPAT stands for Occupational Physical Assessment Test, and the Occupational Physical Assessment Test became law of the land the 3rd of January of this year. Since the Occupational Physical Assessment Test has gone into place, we've had a decrease in attrition from the 12% to about 10%, which is huge for us in that not only is that it shows some progress, but it showed progress in a time where we usually don't have a decrease in attrition. We usually have an increase in attrition during this time period, because during this time period that we implemented it, it is usually when we have individuals who have tried something else, who their desire really wasn't to join the Army. They tried college, they tried getting a job, they just tried hanging out on mom and dad's couch. And all those things didn't work out for them in one way or the other, so they end up joining the Army. So their motivation wasn't necessarily there. They didn't have the propensity to serve initially. So these are the ones that usually wash out. But what we're seeing is that the OPAT gives them something to attain, to improve their fitness prior to coming in, and then once they approve their fitness coming in, we've seen that it builds positive momentum for the individual. So we don't know exactly if it's the fact that they don't fall out of that first run, that they are willing to tough it out and stay a little bit longer, but we know that we make them a little bit tougher so the type of injuries that they exhibit aren't as severe over time. And we've seen that decrease. So we think that this is going to be continue on a positive trend for us, and we're going to continue to see this decrease. Now, previously, there's some of us been around that says that at one time IMT got down to a 5% attrition rate. We had a CG that, probably about 4 CGs ago that told us, hey, decrease attrition. So we decreased attrition to about 5%. But we pushed that bolus to first UA, and then first UA had an increase in attrition because those individuals they were weeded out, whether we did it or first UA did it. But in this particular case, our attrition is decreasing, and first UA's attrition has not increased. So we think this is a positive trend, and we think this is a step in that right direction. Using that model and some of that assessment studies that was done by USARIUM, thank you, MedCom, for all the help with that. We will start working on the ACRT. Next slide, please. So the ACRT is the Army Combat Readiness Tests. And Army Combat Readiness Tests based on those same principles of improving explosive power, speed and agility, muscular strength and endurance, muscular and cardiovascular endurance. We are changing the way that the soldiers train. Because right now, the APFT in its current format is only 27% predictive of your ability to do your job. Now, I know that you'll say that PT studs are able to go out and do their job, but PT studs are doing more than just PT. They're doing more than just the three amigos. So they're working out on their own, they're rucking on their own, and so that's why they're able to go out and be exceptional in their jobs. But if an individual is just doing the three amigos, the push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run, their ability to do their job that we require them to do in the Army is only 27% predictive of their ability.
Go forward 2 slides.
I'm talking past the slides. The ACRT is 82% predictive of an individual's ability to do their job. Now, I know somebody may ask what are the events for the ACRT? Well, the events for the ACRT, I think that is one more slide, is it not? Do we have those events?
Next slide.
Yes, please, thank you. Those events right there are the standing power throw, the deadlift, the T push-up, the speed drag, the sprint drag carry, the heel hook, and the leg tuck. So I know somebody's going to ask, what is the T push-up? So some of our, I'm not going to say the name because it's trademark, but some of our functional fitness people out there that do this stuff on the side know that a T push-up is a T push-up where you go down and you take your hands off the ground and then you re-engage your hands on the ground to do your push-up so that you aren't able to bounce off the ground or build momentum, which forces you to generate that power over and over and over again. And that's the only way we can really assess your strength, because if you're bouncing off the ground using your chest or using momentum for your arms, then we really can't assess how well you really are, how efficient your muscles are. Next slide, please. And I think that is it. I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions, so we'll go back from there. And last.
So we'll go to questions in a moment here. I'm going to come back to the Sergeant Major for a wrap-up. But before we do that, one of the things you may have noticed is that the Army's default on a lot of this is to the physical side. It's part of the way we're wired. It's part of the way we've been trained for the last 30 years. We haven't changed our PT test since 1980, so that's 37 years of the same PT test. We're getting ready to change that. But one of the other things that we need to look at changing is not being focused solely on the physical side of things, but to also look at the mental or the cognitive side of things. So to give us a brief view of that, I just got a note that I screwed up. That's okay.
We got one more down.
Yeah, we got one more panel from OTSG before we do that.
Sure. So I'm Colonel Matt Garber. I am the Director of the Rehab and Reintegration Division at OTSG, and we are responsible for the Physical Performance Service line, which includes our musculoskeletal care and policies, as well as human performance optimization efforts, the Traumatic Brain Injury Program, as well as the Comprehensive Pain Program, which is our program for alternatives to opioids, so looking at complementary and alternative medicines for people with acute and chronic pain. So within that, the way we are contributing to the holistic health and fitness, especially in the impact on readiness, we all know the impact of musculoskeletal injuries on readiness, and about 52 to 54%, depending on what point in time you look. But about 52 to 54% of all of our non-deployable soldiers is due to some type of musculoskeletal condition. So what are we doing to get after that and try to improve or decrease the impact of musculoskeletal injuries on readiness? And so a lot of what was already mentioned in terms of looking at entry standards and alternative training methods to decrease the impact of training or the incidence of injuries tied to training, especially preventable injuries, is a big part of what we do in collaboration with TRADOC as well as FORSCOM. We also heard this morning about warrior athletes or tactical athletes and how soldiering is a contact sport, and I think we all know that. And so just like football, basketball, other professional athletes, you train smart, you still can get hurt depending on your occupation and many times things out of your control. So what we heard this morning from our leaders as well is, well, what are we doing to try to keep them in the game? And so our physical performance service line is really working hard in our collaborations with TRADOC and FORSCOM to look at, well, how do we keep people in the fight and in the game? And a lot of our focus is on, when people do get hurt, yes, we want to focus on the prevention. We want to help you train smarter, and train in a functional way so that you're doing tasks when you train that translate to what you do with your occupation to prevent injuries. But when you do get hurt, we know that it's vital that you get seen early to prevent a chronic problem from developing. And that also was alluded to this morning. The sooner you see somebody for a musculoskeletal condition, especially a musculoskeletal expert, the better you do. And that window of opportunity is about 14 days. And we know through multiple studies, not only within the military health system, but in the civilian sector, that individuals that have a musculoskeletal condition that get seen by physical therapists within 14 days have about a 60% decrease in the downstream costs, better outcomes, and less chronicity in the long term. So we really want to make sure that they have readily available access to these musculoskeletal experts. So having forward musculoskeletal care is a big focus of what we've been doing, both with the physical therapists in the brigade combat teams, athletic trainers within TRADOC to work with trainees, and we've seen that significant decrease in missed training time by having those forward musculoskeletal providers within our training units, so they don't have to go with their battle buddy to sick call. And we heard about the traditional sick call where you wait several hours. Well, multiply that by 2 because you got to go with your battle buddy. Now we have the ability to be seen during physical training. If you get hurt and they're not missing any training time, they're getting taken care of during the physical training time. So a lot of our focus is on that early expert musculoskeletal care. And then lastly, really looking at, well, how do we measure the impact on readiness? And so we've developed 2 strategic metrics to measure the impact of musculoskeletal injuries through tracking profiles. And in the new e-profile system, we have 2 metrics. One is just total profile days, which is number of profile days per 100 soldiers per month within a given unit. And then chronic profiles, which is the percentage of soldiers that have a musculoskeletal profile for 90 days or more over a 6-month period. And so we track total days and then the chronic, kind of that long-term impact. And what we've seen is that about 5% of our soldiers make up over 50% of those chronic profiles. So again, we have some big data to help us make decisions about how to try to manage these people, and a big part of that is in profile management, and potentially later on I'll share some vignettes of some installations and some units that have done really well in trying to address those musculoskeletal profiles.
Okay, I'll try this again now. So as we've talked about this, like I said, we very much concentrate on the physical side of things, but there's also a cognitive side or a non-cognitive side, a mental side of things that we're perhaps less focused on. And it is certainly equally important, and it is probably another area where we need to talk a little bit more about it. So with that, I'll turn it over to General Palmer.
Yeah, and I asked Mike as we went through and reviewing all the presentations and stuff, but when we started the human dimension concept, 10 years ago or so, we did break it down into 3 groups: cognitive, physical, social, moral, and we figured we pretty much had the physical. As you notice on this panel, in a lot of the discussions, we default to physical, and I'm going to go, this is not a doc issue, this is an operational commander issue. They don't know what's going on inside the brain. We've got the cognitive domain, and oh, by the way, the social moral, that occurs in the brain. What I'd make the argument is all performance begins in the brain, because even the physical is just an electrical chemical message to the muscle to contract or to release. Everything occurs into the brain, but the majority of our efforts in understanding, we don't necessarily know. And I'll just make the argument. I sat for 3 hours with a DARPA neuroscientist, Dr. Amy Cruz, in the Pentagon early on in this process, and I was going, why don't I know this? So as we go through this, what we've been continuing to try to do is, if we're going to get holistic performance, we've got to understand how to enhance the brain. I made an argument to General Casey. We need a brain gym. If we're really going to muscle groups in the body, let's get the neural networks going in the brain. So part of the challenge, I would argue here, that the medical community needs to help with, but the operational community needs to drive. When we create these performance centers, what is the cognitive, and I want to go beyond cognitive, because social moral is cognitive. That's where you get the moral injuries. It's how it occurs inside the brain, really neural networks going. So the challenge we have, especially for those that don't know, see, I'd love to have the Command Sergeant Major be able to give as much detail on his brain gym as we do for the other gym. And understand, because the decision making and everything else that we do with our soldiers occurs there. I want to know, if he's got a broken leg, I know not to put him on point. If he's not cognitively at his sharpest or her sharpest, should I put him on point or should I not? Where's my tools to tell me that? I don't have those. So I think the challenge for the medical community, and by the way, the medical community was great in educating me. We stood up a whole conference. We had MRC. There's all kinds of knowledge out there, and I'll applaud AUSA with their Tech 10s, where they've brought in companies. This case, you had ASU that's looking at behavior. You're going to have Cerego afterwards. Sergeant Major says, how do I measure really they did the performance? You'll see with Cerego next, you'll see how they can actually measure what knowledge is in there inside the brain based on their technologies. So I've seen it in industry. I've seen it in the universities and all the research pieces. The key is getting the requirements, and I'd argue NCO level all the way up, driving, where's my cognitive component? Because last time I checked, more kids died because of a bad decision than a heavy rucksack, okay? So the key challenge here is, if we're gonna really talk human performance, we've got to understand how we actually perform, and that's why I emphasize the human or the brain portion. And to be honest, most of us don't know. And not that I want to make you neuroscientists, but every soldier out there probably knows where their bicep muscle is, how it applies to their job, and how to improve it. And oh, by the way, we did give them a gym to improve it. So for commanders and decision makers out there, what's the role of the limbic system? And more importantly, how do I improve it? And what have you given me to improve it? And right now, the answer is we don't. Okay? So this is the challenge, I think, as we move forward. The initiative with 722 to do real holistic as opposed to just physical, I think, is a good start as we go through that. So I just wanted to make that point. So this was a challenge early on. I think it continues to be a challenge just because we don't know what we don't know. So I wanted to emphasize that point. And I know the expertise is out there because I've seen them all. We've just got to get it into the system. Oh, one closing thing, because it's always about the human system is our best system. Another thought that I've mentioned before is, we have a -10 that tells us everything to do to make sure a tank's performing properly. I got nothing on the human. I think we need a -10 for the human. And we need to measure, what are they? Are they ready to go on mission, and what's their level? How are they doing during the mission? And what do they look like when they come back, so we can get left of PTSD, left of TBI, because we put it in the leadership structures, the squad leaders, the platoon leaders levels, to say, here's the tools, just like we do for cold weather injuries. We already know, because they told us, this group more susceptible, here's what you got to check, and if they look like that, then send it to us. They're still going on patrol in Alaska, but really any cold weather injuries or leadership failure here, not a medical problem. Let's get the rest of the systems going that way. So I'm going to transition now to questions, and we've got a bevy of questions that came out from the audience.
Hold on 1 second.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
My turn. Hey, I'd like to, next slide there. Hey, I cannot think of someone better on this panel, at least, to talk about the relationship of a CIMT and MedCom and rolling this together than Command Sergeant Major Greg. Next slide, we'd like to summarize a little bit. Sergeant Major.
I love this guy. He always does this to me. So how to summarize our relationship? The relationship that IMT and MedCom has bridged and is continuing to build is crucial to the furthering and development of the human being, the soldier themselves, the soldier as a weapon system. You know, and we often talk about how we have a lot of tech and money spent on designing and improving our weapon systems, our tanks, our Apaches, our aircraft, but the most lethal weapon system on the battlefield is the American soldier. And we have not yet invested in that in that American soldier right now. We are starting to now, and it's the relationship between MedCom and IMT that is really developing and nurturing and fostering and leading the way of that development of the human weapon system. Because, like you know, I had a discussion the other day with somebody, and they were talking, and I hate to talk about IMT issues, but I'm going to throw one out there about putting drill sergeants back in the AMT, and that's not something feed for questions or anything like that, so please don't go, no questions on that today. But it was just a cost, you know, and it was just relative to what it'll cost to develop all those soldiers as they are going through the training pipeline versus the cost of one M1 Abrams tank. And it was to train all the Army with drill sergeants and AIT cost less than one M1 Abrams tank. So what it really mattered, what was most important to the Army? Was it the M1 Abrams tank, that one tank, or was it to feed the Army with the best capable soldiers that have to operate those tanks? You know, and we've been talking with our money saying it was the weapon system, but we were looking at the wrong weapon systems in Greg's opinion. So now we are trying to refocus back to the right weapon systems and get us there. So as we move forward with the holistic health and fitness, that is a redesign, actually an asthma check on us getting back to what we need to do as far as rehabilitating and building the weapon system of the American soldier. I think that sums it up for me. Mr. McGurk, back to you.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll move to question and answers. And by the way, if anybody else has we've got quite a few. And Tim, I think there's going to be quite a few coming your way as well. So, but I'm going to start out with Colleen. Colonel Scholl, how do you include P3 in our doctrine and in our education?
So I would say, first of all, you have to insert it into doctrine. So that is the role of OTSG to collaborate with the other entities and insert it into doctrine, whether it's FM 7-22, Holistic Health and Fitness, AR 40-5, which is Army Public Health Programs, et cetera, et cetera. So insert it into doctrine. Then you need to get it into the courses and to the POIs, and that's a matter of the AMED Center and School then. The Centers of Excellence will provide P3 program or provide Army MedCom how much time is allotted in their POI. And then the AMED Center and School determines, they rack and stack what is the most important content within that amount of time to insert into the PME and to the POIs. So that's where it's a matter of us also coordinating with the centers and schools as far as getting out the message to the senior leaders of the importance of P3 as a resource. And then there's the soldiers, the FORSCOM soldiers, and how do we get it out there? And at this point, this is a nascent program. It's not a program, it's content, but nonetheless, it's rather nascent, and so we're still working on that. The idea is to have centralized training and decentralized execution, somewhat like the SHARP program. So that's where we are now, and that's how we would move forward with P3.
Thank you. This might be for Sergeant Major and Colonel McGurk. How do you see a new MOS or ASI rolling out? Why is the future of master fitness training? or what is the future of master fitness training?
Okay, Mr. McGurk, since you're going to look at me again. So he does it to me constantly. Ideally, as we move forward, and there's a couple of initiatives that we're trying to get pushed through with Master Fitness. So where we're at currently with Master Fitness is not where we want to be. And the Master Fitness today is not the Master Fitness that we want to have tomorrow. So the Master Fitness of today, we would like that to be every individual in the Army. So we would like to get every individual Army trained up to where the Master Fitness of today is at right now, so that the Master Fitnesses of the future would come out of school with certifications, whether it be strength and conditioning coach certifications or athletic trainer certifications, so they can take us to the next level. Because right now, the Master Fitness, and we're adjusting the POI and adapting and growing it as we speak, the Master Fitness individual is not being utilized and maximized to their potential, nor is the Master Fitness program right now designed to take us to where we want to do the Army to, and with the holistic health and fitness. So as far as an MOS is concerned, you know, and Mr. McGurk and I have had several discussions about this. My idea versus his idea, not saying who's right or wrong, they're just different ideas, differing. I say they're just different opinions. Mr. McGurk is thinking something more on the lines, and some of his team were thinking something more on the lines of a 79 Romeo, where it becomes a permanent MOS. I, on the other hand, was thinking something more of it's a functional MOS, where you go into it much like with the nominative SAR major program, where we go into it and you become a 00F or a 00 fitness, and you carry that MOS while you're serving in that position. And then as you no longer are proficient in that position, or you are deemed that you're not very effective in that position, you are then sent back to your previous MOS so you can continue to matriculate. Therefore, we don't have to build a whole lot of growth potential and a pyramid structure for the individual as they decide to pursue a career in fitness, because that pyramid would be very, very shallow at the top. Greg's opinion. I'll throw it back to you.
So real quickly, I'll just add a couple things to that. Personnel management is not the strength, I don't think, of anybody up here on this panel, so we have to figure out how the Army wants to structure that to work the process. But the two things that I'll tell you is that if you're in a mechanized unit or almost any unit today, you have a master gunner, and a master gunner goes to a minimum of 12 weeks training and then does that throughout their time. They've got master gunners at company and master gunners at battalion and up at division, and that's a minimum of 12 weeks training. We also have a battalion motor officer and a battalion motor sergeant, and we have maintenance contact teams and mechanics. And all these people are in the battalion to take care of all that equipment. And we have the soldier as a system, and we're doing a fairly poor job of establishing people with primary duties to do the 10, 20, 30, 40 level maintenance of those soldiers. And so I think we need somebody with a permanent duty at the company, battalion, brigade, division level with that permanent role assigned to them. And they're going to need training to do that. And 14 weeks would be just a start. If you look at our allies, you look at the Canadians, you look at the Australians, you look at the British, their programs are 6 months for their basic level training. The French military, the program is almost 2 years long. So we're talking to people with some good talents, and these people are deployable in those units. They go with them to combat, and they aid in the functions in combat, combat stress, trying to prevent PTSD and a lot of other issues. So we're looking for a talented individual that can step up and take this role. Thank you.
Okay, next question, and we are a total force, and I've actually got a couple questions from the total force, so I'll try to combine them from the one, I think. These programs work well for formal installations and for primarily the active component. What, if anything, is being done to address the needs of the Guard and Reserve?
Is that for anybody in particular?
Anybody on the panel.
So I'll be glad to jump on a grenade.
My man.
I'm a former Guardsman myself before I went active. We understand the reserve component. It's a challenge.
Yes.
And we admit it from the beginning that it's a big challenge. The Guard and Reserve don't have the same facilities that the active duty has now. They probably won't be appropriate to build the facilities, these holistic training centers that we're talking about at Guard facilities necessarily, or at Reserve facilities. They are partners in the development. We work with them every day. We have 2 liaisons in our headquarters. Our first testing for the ACART will be at the beginning of August, and we're doing it with the Washington National Guard. We've also established master fitness centers with the National Guard and the Army Reserve across the country, and those will expand as well. We're going to have to think outside the box on this one. It may be that once we have the program developed in the active Army, that as we expand it to the Guard, we have to pay for membership at Planet Fitness or Gold's Gym or something like that to help out with some of the strength and development we need. There's also a lot of portable systems, gym in a box we call it, mobile conics type systems that can be used. It's a challenge, and it's something we're going to have to work through, but we acknowledge and recognize it. Sergeant Major?
Absolutely. And, you know, one of those things is that, you know, because they are not on a full-time status, building a full-time facility would be a waste of resources because it would be empty 90% of the time. So we have to be very, very creative and innovative with figuring out how to make sure we support Compo 2 and 3. You know, we have talked about, you know, vigorously about, you know, some type of membership for those individuals. And then, you know, states have the ability to build for the National Guard, you know, what they want to do as far as facilities, but we have talked about those capabilities. And then our other challenge is developing that POI for that Master of Fitness that is very long, and that MOS, how do we support that with Compo 2 and 3 because of the amount of time that it requires them to be on training to get the amount of training? You know, do we have a DL program that is that long, or will we accept or pay for them to go to a local college in their neighborhood to get that training, those certificates, and then we accept those from Western Michigan or from the University of Illinois? That is something that we're internally wrestling with because we do know that Compo 2 and 3 are vital to the success of the team, and that if we don't set up a program that's successful for them, then the Army as a total will fail.
Colonel Garber, we talk frequently about wellness and fitness. How does this tie into human performance, relationship between health, wellness, performance optimization?
Yeah, so I see it as a continuum. I think, you know, what we need from our soldiers is, and again, if we're going to approach it as a tactical athlete or a warrior athlete, they've got to be able to perform very specific physical functions, and they've got to have strong emotional strength, good emotional strength to perform in austere environments under stressful conditions. And so you can be healthy but not able to perform, and you could be well or fit, i.e. you could pass your APFD, as Sergeant Major said, but not be able to pass the ACRT or the FORSCOM soldier readiness test that's currently being piloted, because those soldiering tasks require different types of movement under load that we don't test or frequently train for in our current Army physical training mindset. So I am supportive certainly of efforts to shift kind of to this more functional type model of strength and conditioning, which includes speed, agility, power, not just endurance, and not just anterior chain. You know, we do the mirror muscles. We do chest, we do quads, we do abs, but that then creates a lot of muscle imbalances that leads to a lot of the injuries that we have. And if you look at professional athletes, professional hockey players, they do a lot of posterior chain, a lot of glute strengthening, a lot of hamstring strengthening. And the ratio of their hamstrings to quads is like the polar opposite of what soldiers have. So we have a lot of ACL injuries and a lot of knee and shoulder and back injuries due to those types of muscle imbalances. So I think the shift really is to, if we're going to approach it like they're athletes, and you look at what professional athletes, college athletes have in terms of how they train, the facilities that they have, and the access to medical providers readily available in the area that they do the training, then I think, you know, again, I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing with the model that we've been discussing.
And of course, I'd add mirror neurons too, so that we can build up the quicker decision-making process. Sergeant Major, did you want to add something there?
Y'all guys a hit parade today on Greg. Supporting what you were saying, Colonel Garber, we definitely have to make sure that we develop the posterior chain muscles. You know, we have a lot of back, neck injuries. lower body injuries due to the fact that we do a whole bunch of push-ups, sit-ups, and we do very little deadlifts, pull-ups, squats, and the Army of the future and the jobs that we require now, we require soldiers to go into the gym and lift weights. But previously, it wasn't something that we encouraged institutionally. It was a matter of the ones who wanted to lift weights, they went and lifted weights. But the majority of us, depending on what units you were in, we got there, we stretched, and we ran. And you ran for an hour, and then you came back, you stretched, and then you went to shower, go change, and get back to work. So definitely we're working at trying to get the soldier athlete back into the middle of the fitness triangle, because right now we have been pulled down to the bottom right corner to the endurance portion of the fitness triangle.
And if I could just add one other comment. So again, using kind of this athlete analogy, and I've thought about this for many, many years, and I think that analogy is okay because, again, we do require soldiers to do athletic things. But they come in many times not athletic.
Right.
And a professional athlete or a college athlete is recruited because of a demonstrated physical ability. And they are recruited to then perform that physical ability in college or drafted and paid big money to do that professionally. And then they do that, if they're a college athlete and they're done, it's 4 years and they're done. If they're a pro athlete, they make it to that second contract, and stay in the league for 5 to 7 years. That's a long career. Good. Well, 10 years, you made it to 30 years old. That's a long career. What are we asking? What's a career in the Army is 20 years. So you're 38, 40, 42, whatever. When do professional athletes really start having challenges and breaking down? When they're in their 30s. And even the most elite athletes struggle many times once they have an injury at that point in time in their life. So again, we got to make sure we understand that soldiers don't come in that fit. So we got to make sure that we're smart in how we train them to get them to where we need them to be, because we know that that's a challenge. And there is a difference. And there is a difference in sustaining them over the course of an Army career and how long that is versus how long, say, a professional or collegiate athlete is, quote unquote, performing.
One real quick add, and then we got a question for Tim. One of the things you have to look at when we look at Olympic level training and professional sports level training is the margin that they're trying to get. Yeah. When you're an Olympic athlete, you're trying to get someone that runs a mile in 3:46 to get him from 3:46 to 3:42. You're trying to shave 2 or 3 seconds off someone's time at a world-class level. And that's a really hard thing to do, and it requires very specialized programs, diet, nutrition, and a lot of stuff together. We're trying to get a lot of our soldiers from a 11-minute mile to an 8-minute mile. And it's a completely different paradigm there. Right. And so some of the techniques are broadly the same, but a lot of the very specialized things for Olympic athletes and professional sports just don't apply to our soldier population, and also when you consider that we're trying to sustain their performance over 20 or 30 years.
And I'm going to add a comment here because I'm going to do the cognitive side, okay? First of all, for us older people that are cognitively getting slower, we do have this concept called wisdom because we have our experiences. But I only bring this up because we have a further question on the professional athletes, and I've worked with companies that are working with professional athletes from the brain side, because you take your professional quarterbacks like Matt Ryan, how does he keep and manage multiple attention for multiple events going on to make those calls? And by the way, I would equate that to the senior leaders and squad leaders out there trying to deal with a lot of massive information. We've got all the information technology that's feeding at us. The brain actually can be trained for that, some of that for performance, and as you get older, obviously, it becomes even more important that we develop those capabilities and expand, let's say, simple attributes like attention. How do I do that? So in the professional sports are doing it. There's companies that are starting to make money in that. Those are the things we need to do. But as we have these discussions, we need to remember the cognitive portion that we need to be developing during all this stuff as well. because at 30, the rucksack does start getting heavier and it takes a little harder.
So, sir, we are incorporating some performance coaching into it now, not to the extent of probably that you desire or to stimulate a whole bunch of neurons, but we're trying to give the individual the ability to learn some of their deficiencies and weaknesses and how to focus and overcome some of their challenges.
By the way, I keep pushing the agenda because that's our big gap right now, is the one that needs to be pushed. There is great efforts going on out there, both in the medical community and the other piece. But so I didn't want to diminish that, Sergeant Major.
No, none taken, sir.
And Tim, Mr. Higgin, does the healthy menu requirement apply to the national brand food outlets or Post, like Burger King, Popeyes, et cetera?
So I'm not going to speak too heavily on behalf of the exchange, but they are definitely a very strong partner in what we're doing. And these discussions happen. We sit around the table, and like I said, we hold each other accountable. So we know that there's challenges there, and there's some perceptions that we have to overcome. And I can say that I'm very proud of the exchange and the steps they are taking towards improving the food environment that they have access and control over. As they look at underperforming brands, instead of just throwing in another less perceived healthy brand, such as, well, I won't say any so I won't get myself in trouble, but they are committed and putting in healthier perceived brands in place of those. So as contracts come up for expiration, as they identify underperforming brands, they are trying to put more healthy brands into our locations. And to augment that, just to wave their flag a little bit, they are working very hard with their BFIT program, which you can see in your express locations now. They've got dedicated island coolers now that have healthy-only items that are available on it, end caps that are showing performance food and nutritional food. So they are doing their part. Again, they're working with us on the vending aspect of it, increasing that 15 to 50%, and in some cases 100%. So are they fixing everything right away? No, but they are taking steps, and they're being very proactive. They're being a part of the conversation, just as is DECA with their Thumbs Up program, identifying nutritional food in the aisles, that if you use that to assemble a meal, it closely aligns with the nutritional requirement of Go for Green. So there's just some great collaboration and partnerships that are going on, and everybody's doing their part. It may be small initially, but at least we're all taking steps to move us in that direction. And so very proud of the work that all of the stakeholders are doing. Can be more be done? Absolutely. And we're going to get there. But we're going to start out here doing what we can, when we can, to start making that improvement for our overall communities.
To add on to another question, so we don't have to read them twice, tobacco and alcohol, it's a challenge. Okay, so I tell people to come to work for me that we're at the level where politics begins. So we can recommend that we eliminate alcohol and tobacco from the commissary and the PX and the Class 6. It's very unlikely that's going to happen. There are a lot of political forces, honestly, that have to do with that. And also, we're still a nation with freedom of choice, and there's a lot of retirees and other people that make those choices. It's for health and for fitness, it's a tough challenge. In IMT, we have taken the position that we do not allow alcohol or tobacco in the initial phases of IMT. Later on, it's a privilege or a right that they earn back. Is that the best way? It's tough. I don't have an easy answer to that. If someone has an easy answer to that, I would love to know what it is, because politically in the United States, that's one of those rails that we really can't easily go after. We've made progress. We're pushing towards it. I think it's been deglamorized quite a bit in the military. You're seeing it less prominent for sales in some places, but it's still a challenge for us.
Mike, if I could, since you touched on tobacco and alcohol a little bit, you know, the Health of the Force report just came out for 2016, it was. And I think, you know, that showed that we take non-smokers and we turn them into smokers. And so what are we going to do about that? How do we address that? And so even a part of the innovation demonstrations that we're doing, I want to applaud MedCom, because our medical campuses are tobacco-free. We've already decided medical campuses, it's not 50 feet from the building, the entire campus is tobacco-free. And so what we want to do as part of the innovation demonstration is take that a step further and go, okay, we know we have the 50-foot rule, but how can we work together so that if we have a CDC, a youth center, an arts and crafts center, and a library all within a 2 or 3 block radius, let's make that whole zone tobacco-free. Really with the goal of protecting our children from the behavior of tobacco use. It's great that they have to go outside the building, but our kids can still see them standing out there smoking or chewing or whatever the case may be. So let's create safe zones for our kids as part of these innovation demonstrations at our garrisons that align with what we're already doing on our medical campuses, so that, yeah, it may not be in my lifetime that our garrisons become completely tobacco-free, but at least let's start taking steps. Let's expand on what has worked, what has been successful, and so I'm excited about that. I think that's a great way for us to kind of take the next step as we get into that, and Mike, thanks for bringing that up.
Yes, I wanted to make a comment about P3. The way I look at P3 is that it's low-hanging fruit to provide awareness. If we want people to change their behavior, they first have to be aware that what they're doing may be suboptimal, or that there are other ways for their sleep, activity, nutrition, and how they go about their daily life, as well as with their family, themselves, their units, the garrison. And so I feel like one of the ways, I just want to sort of reiterate that I think, yeah, it all starts with an awareness. Anyone or any entity needs to know this is an issue. Gosh, if I knew that I needed sleep, I would have slept a whole lot more in college. My GPA might have been a lot better, that type of thing. So leverage these resources.
Well, let me, since you mentioned this, because I think Colonel Skoll brought up a key thing. We have a culture challenge that we're facing with the kids when we get them. And by the way, this is part of the piece. We're still working on the ethics and behavior aspects of, we come from a very diverse society that's brought up a little different, and we get kids at some level of development, behavioral development, when we get them. And, one of the things Amy taught me early on is when you get them, their frontal lobes probably aren't developed yet. So they're not going to be making rational decisions. They're going to be making behavioral decisions based on the cultures they came from. So, I think our challenge is bigger than just education. It's the awareness. It's a long-term, because we got to grow neural network that tells them this is bad. Now, and then you got chemicals working against you like fat, which our brain really likes, so we eat the hamburgers, but also the piece of the smoking. We got a real challenge in this, not just in this health piece, but I would call it in our moral health with the different levels that come in. So we need to understand what our kids come in at, where they're, I'll argue, neurally wired at this point, and how we can actually reshape them, especially if we can develop their frontal lobes for rational decision making. So part of these programs, I would argue, everything that's doing here is a development for building the right neural networks, so they do it out of behavioral habit versus just an education program that they checked off on. So I applaud everybody's efforts, but I would argue the challenge is much larger because we're growing new neural networks to cause this behavior change. And well, I was going to bring up sleep next because she and I both got in at 2 o'clock in the morning, so we're cognitively not where we should be, thanks to the weather and planes. But the one question one of the audience asked, what was the results for the armor unit which banked sleep?
Oh, the results were that their gunnery scores went from 1 year earlier, their results went from 756 to 919. That's a significant amount. For 4 platoons, their average score went to 919, which is distinguished. 3 of the 4 platoons fired distinguished, as well as they reported that they were more well-rested, they were more agreeable, they declined at a slower rate, their morale was higher. The leaders noticed it also. So overall, they found it to be a rather simple thing to apply once they determined that they were going to operationalize it. But it has to be put into a plan. It's not something that, oh, you're going to take your nappuccino whenever you want, or you're going to sleep whenever you want. There was a prioritization of sleep. And first and foremost, the leaders need the most sleep because their decision-making requires the highest level of cognitive capability. And so ultimately, that was the result of it. They found it to be extremely beneficial, but they also found that the leader has to believe in it. And it starts at the top. We all know that.
And we have a culture of not sleeping, and for many of us in the operational units, we us planners in particular just think it's manly that we got to stay up and not sleep all night and put the plans together. But that's the equivalent of a commander saying, I'm okay that all my leaders are cognitively drunk, literally drunk in their performance to be able to out and go do the mission because we didn't get them to sleep. And I'll just admit, as the Op 4 commander at NTC, I slept a lot, and especially if I had a commander that I knew liked to manage the battlefield hands-on, I made sure that he got an event to manage all night. Because all I was looking for was a 10 or 15-minute window that I could get an advantage on the battlefield, and that's the kind of difference you can do when you can't make decisions quickly because you've essentially made yourself drunk and delayed. So, I mean, it's huge, but it's also another cultural issue.
And the leaders also said that they only needed to give out the information one time. The soldiers took the information and they didn't have to be retold what to do, et cetera, et cetera.
How will proposed ACRT impact soldiers with profiles? Are there alternate events?
So right now, currently, there are no planned alternate events in the ACRT. How will that affect soldiers with profiles? That is a policy question that I would like to respectfully defer to Army G1 and how they implement the policy. We know that if there is no alternate event and there is repercussions for not taking the ACRT, we know that it will cause holes in the force. We know that there is a certain percentage of the force that, unfortunately, some of them at no fault of their own are unable to do a 3-event PT test, and so some of the events of the ACRT would not be something that they could accomplish. However, the ACRT are based off the warrior task and battle drills of what is expected of a soldier to be able to perform. And if an individual is not able to perform these activities, the question is how much risk is the force willing to accept as far as the ACRT moving forward. If the ACRT in its current form goes forward and the policy doesn't allow for, or the policy allows for profiling, then we have changed the name from the APFT to the ACRT, but we haven't changed the culture within our Army. And so if we don't change the policy within our Army so that it does not necessarily, I don't want to say it excludes individuals from having an alternate event, but it highly discourages individuals from having an alternate event, then we have put a lot of energy and effort towards a failing program right up front. Mr. McGurk.
So, you know, we propose policy. The G1 will approve it and the CSA will approve it. We propose policy. What I have proposed is similar to the current PT test. You have to pass a PT test. If you don't pass a PT test, there's a length of time, and when you fail your next one, you're processed for separation. So with the ACART, we believe that you would be, you know, given a length of time. Obviously, if you're on an active profile, that time can be extended to a certain amount of time, but at some point it becomes, you know, kind of fish or cut bait, and we were looking at around 2 years. If you can't pass an ACRT about every 2 years, we think that the Army ought to seriously consider whether your service to the country could be better than in uniform as a soldier working with us. There's plenty of other places you can serve your country. I'm not in the Army anymore. I like to think I'm still serving. It doesn't mean that everybody has to be wearing a uniform every day that says U.S. Army. If you've been injured, you deserve compensation and disability, and we need to give you the best care possible.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean that you can necessarily take a position that we need for soldiers that can deploy and fight with us when required.
Could I chime in on that real quick? So, as I consider myself an outsider to this community here, I'm glad that I've been here and been able to listen to a part of this. And having been an old soldier myself and having kids that were soldiers and a spouse and all of that, this is very exciting stuff. But what I also know, just from kind of being outside looking in, is that so many of you are already doing things to try to help resolve and avoid this particular situation. Yes. With Army wellness centers, your health promotion officers, all the different things that you're trying to put into place to educate, create awareness, provide opportunities for soldiers to excel. Some of these, the Tech 10s that we've had, some of the technology that's out there that's available for us to help our soldiers excel is just, it's exciting stuff. This is an exciting time. And so, as we look to reshape And again, this is just an old soldier saying this, but as we look to reshape the physical fitness test and how we measure a soldier's ability to be ready to serve their country in a combat capacity, I'm excited by the fact that we've got so much that's aligned to help support that and to give them the most opportunity to succeed in that. And so to me, again, I'm just excited about hearing about all this because are there challenges to it? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But everybody's focused on the same thing. What is best for our soldiers and how can we move our Army forward? And so I just applaud everybody on the panel and in this room because you're doing some exciting work and it's just, I'm amazed. Thanks.
Okay, this one, this will be the last question, and this is for the entire panel, and I think it gets to one of the challenges we have out there. It says, we've been working on the human performance optimization and the performance triad for several years now, yet we have more obese and out-of-shape soldiers than we ever did before, so when do we realize what we are currently doing is not working? So I'm going to add another argument that I've heard in other panels as well is given some of the requirements that the Army needs, which may or may not be physical, it might be like your cyber shooters and everything else, do we have to have, by the way, I would argue you need physically fit, performance fit across the board, but in the same vein is, are those same standards as an infantry guy carrying the rifle and to get the right kind of people in? I'll just say that's been arguments in other communities and everything else. So I throw this out to the panel as the final. We've got 4 minutes for anybody that would like to address that.
I was supposed to tell the Sergeant Major for at least one question. I have no idea if I could ever answer it, but I won't. We've had this discussion for a long time in our headquarters, and what I'd want to say is the ACRT and our new test are based on the warrior task and battle drills. That means the task and standards of what it takes to be a soldier, what it takes to wear a uniform that says U.S. Army on it. And if people can't meet those minimum standards when called upon, I believe there's a role for them to serve, but I don't think it's in our uniformed armed services. There's plenty of other ways they can serve and other capacities they can serve in. We have other parts of our government that allow them to serve and do some of the functions that we need in cyber or other areas. But wearing the uniform that says U.S. Army is a privilege and an honor, and there's some responsibilities, and one of those is a baseline level of fitness and capability, which I think we need to maintain. And I do think that we are recognizing that what we are doing has not been working. 37 years is a long time to go with one PT test. Historically, we changed it about every 10 years. Holistic health and fitness is a radical change, radical departure. It is going to cost the Army money, time, and people, and we've got to be willing to give that up to make the changes that we need.
So some of the changes that we're proposing, we're not making changes just for the sake of making change. Some of the things that we're not touching are because it's not that the policy is bad, it's how we're implementing the policy that is bad. And prime example will be 600-9. 600-9 works. What doesn't work is the leaders who are enforcing 600-9. So, you know, we often get hit about, hey, are we going to readdress 600-9? And sure, 600-9 is something that will be looked at in the future as far as the body composition and how we measure body fat and how we measure an individual's ability to carry weight, because just like the young man from Biotech was talking about earlier, you know, Danica Patrick versus Shaq, you know, those are two different people, and you start measuring body mass index, they're going to be different numbers. But the things that we are attempting to change are because we have missed the ball and we haven't adjusted to the population that we have in our Army and to the force and to the requirements that are placed on our Army. So we're trying to make those adjustments so that we get it right this time and have it on a cyclical assessment, so that we are continuing to look at it as the Army evolves and how the nature of war evolves to move forward from there. And to that last point about cyber warriors, we have talked about that on several occasions about, you know, do we have to have those individuals in the OD uniform? Can we not have them as DA civilians that are able to do that? And that comes back to a Title 10 and who is able to execute the instruments of war from where they're at. You know, there was a pilot, not a pilot, there was a program by Google not too long ago where Google went out and they hired quite a number of young autistic Americans, not because of any other reason except that they were really good at doing their thing. They were specialized. So we may have to look at programs in the future where we are specialized and say, hey, you know, some of our generation are not necessarily physically the most gifted individual, but mentally they are super gifted. And so therefore we may have to assess them in a capacity where we're able to utilize their mental capabilities, but not have them in a combatant type scenario where they're having to meet the same standards as our combatants, if that makes any sense.
Okay, I would like to take now to thank the panel, and if everybody could give a round of applause for their effort as we're going.
And the panel will stay up here and answer any questions you have one-on-one.
We have our last AUSA Tech in 10 presentation at this time. Allow me to introduce Mr. Andrew Smith-Lewis, CEO and co-founder of Cerego, LLC, and he's going to speak on what can advances in brain science coupled with artificial intelligence bring to medical training. So let's have a round of applause for Mr. Smith-Lewis.
Good afternoon. How are y'all doing? Awesome. Okay. I have my 10 minutes in the sun at AUSA to talk to you about AI and brain science. So let's dive in. Thinking about education and looking out, I think that education breaks into two major buckets of content and classrooms, and that's been the same for about 2,000 years. And in that time, of course, we have seen some advancements. We have made progress, especially with technology, but that's introduced a whole host of new problems, such as PICN. You all familiar with PICN? Absolutely. It is presentation-induced cerebral necrosis, known as death by PowerPoint. So I think part of the reason we end up in those situations is that education is really focused on the what, the content, or the where classrooms, but not on the how. And so what I'm very interested in is, can we radically improve how we learn at scale? And that's the mission of Cerego. So I'm CEO, co-founder of Cerego. We want to keep the people ahead of the machines, and we do this by, our mission is to improve the way the world learns. We built a single generalizable platform for any content from astronomy to zoology, medicine, music, and all things in between. The platform helps people acquire and demonstrate knowledge and capability. We're very big about helping to get content into people's heads and keeping it there, but also to quantify what they know on a very granular basis. Essentially, we want to make people smarter. Does anybody not want to be smarter? Okay. We believe that the intersection of the internet and learning science is going to have a massive impact on educational outcomes, especially since we're all running around with microcomputers in our pockets 24/7 hooked to the internet. And my company is all about the science of learning. And what I want to do is give you a 30,000-foot view of three areas of our science: the brain science, the cognitive science, and the data science. The brain science, we've introduced something called DARPA. Are you all familiar with DARPA? Our DARPA is the Distributed Adaptive Retrieval Practice Algorithm, and this takes advantage of two of the most readily provable psychological phenomena for learning. If long-term retention is your goal, you distribute that information out over time, and if you want to actually build and stimulate that neural net, you practice retrieval practice, sometimes called the testing effect. This is the complete opposite of what students do naturally. Students like to cram, which is a great short-term strategy and a lousy long-term strategy, and they like to reread because they have the feeling of knowing, but that's not a good way to build long-term potentiation. So our system can measure what you know, what you don't know, and create an optimal review schedule for you to build and maintain lasting knowledge. On the cognitive science side, we focus on this concept of easing the metacognitive burden. When somebody engages in a learning task, part of their cognitive workload is focused on the task at hand, but a lot of their brain power goes to trying to figure out, what should I do now? How much time should I spend? What's difficult for me? What's easy? What's for lunch? How do I get ready for that test in 3 weeks? And we just have a better mousetrap. When you come to Cerego, it knows exactly what you need to see. Here I need to review 3 items out of 67. I can get in and out in a matter of minutes, and that's going to increase my engagement and my motivation. And on the data science side, we have a learning engine. The more people use the system, the smarter the algorithm gets about really quantifying knowledge. This is a visualization that an instructor would get for a particular course on anatomy of the heart. All those orbs represent users. And what we're able to do is tell real time where everyone is. And we have this data-driven model for talent assessment. We can measure knowledge, but we can also measure grit, agility, and motivation for any content, for any users. We have a full stack learning solution, which is a fancy way of saying we go end to end. We have authoring environments, we have distribution networks, we have learning applications with a heavy focus on mobile, and we have those insight apps that really put your finger on the pulse of your own learning, but show you where your users are at any given moment. And our mantra at Cerego is this concept of durable, flexible, and usable knowledge. Durability and flexibility speak to the aspect of retention. If the stuff is not in your head, you're not going to be able to use it. And usable knowledge really talks about transference, your ability to perform in the field. You have to have both of these things in order to win, and that's the goal of Cerego. We've deployed this across K-12, higher ed, corporate, and now government, and I'll tell you a bit about some of our projects. We have about 200 enterprise clients around the world. Let me walk you through a couple of examples that might be relevant to this particular audience. One of our first clients was a group called Elsevier. They're the largest health science publisher on the planet. They work with us in the field of nursing, dental, and veterinary sciences. They've got about 90,000 nurses that have used Cerego to learn foundational elements from about 120 textbooks. So they've taken their textbooks, they've figured out what's the important content that they want their students to remember, they've put it into Cerego and deployed it out to nursing schools across the country. We work with JR. This is the operator of the bullet trains in Japan. They train drivers in reducing human error, which is a really good thing when you're going 300 miles an hour. Spartan is the oldest flight school in the country. They train people in all the regulations of FAA regulations and the stuff you cover in ground school. You know who UNICEF is. They use us for vaccine logistics, cold chain equipment selection. We work with the U.S. Army. First pilot was at USERPAC. They did battle captain's basics, and now they're doing EIB tasks, such as adjusting under indirect fire. We work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We've won multiple grants from the Gates Foundation. Our last one we've used to build content and work with experts in the field for biology, anatomy and physiology, statistics. This goes out to at-risk and underserved students across 75 community colleges in the U.S. Last but not least, Harvard Medical School just onboarded Cerego for biochemistry. So all of these people are about the what or the where. The what is the content, the where is a field of operations, online classrooms, in an actual corporate environment, and we provide the how. Lots of third-party efficacy studies and research. We collaborate with a bunch of universities across the country. We're in a longitudinal study with SRI right now. And let me give you a practical example. So in 2015, New York University onboarded 350 dental students. 2 faculty members created all of the content that they needed to challenge the dental board exam, and they took the tests, and they got a 100% pass rate. Every one of those students got passed the first time out, which is great. NYU's a good school. They're usually at about 80%, so 100 was a big number. They scored 2.6 standard deviations above the national average. So that puts them way on the right of that bell curve, which is pretty cool. But the thing that got the faculty most excited and why they did a university adoption with Cerego is they cut instructor time by 50%. They were able to offload the foundational knowledge to the system so that students came to class actually knowing that stuff, prepared to discuss it. They repeated this in 2016 with 400 students. Nothing perfect lasts forever. We dropped to 99.75. 1 student failed the dental board exams. Can you imagine being the one kid at NYU who missed it? I was telling this story to General Lundy. He said that guy probably had a flip phone. So Cerego does not work on flip phones. The faculty that worked with Cerego won the university-wide Distinguished Teaching Award, which was super cool. We are doing a pilot, a prototype with PEO Stry, and the content is the TC3 Tactical Combat Casualty Care Program. And the way this program is working is we're taking their PowerPoint presentations for TC3, we're extracting the knowledge from that, and we're making Cerego sets. These are modules of content, and those modules of content become automated, personalized, deployed to our application. We think of the content as sort of the personalized learning Lego. The beauty of Lego is all the bricks always fit together, and you can make anything you want. You can make a battleship or a Christmas tree with Lego, and the same thing with Cerego. Once you have the content in Cerego, you can remix it and reuse it. It's not dead on arrival. And then finally, it gets deployed to an application which knows if you need to see a video on applying a tourniquet or be asked a scenario about giving somebody CPR. Lastly, I want to tell you a story about Colonel Lou Ziesman. I met Colonel Ziesman at USERPAC in a debriefing for General Brown. And in the middle of this debriefing, when we was talking about learning and memory, he got very excited, asked permission to speak, and told a really remarkable story about his wife, Missy Ziesman, who 2 years prior had a double aneurysm and spent months and months, went through 8 operations, and was at Walter Reed when I met him. And he said, hey, I don't know how technology works, but can we get this for my wife? So we said, of course. We set about building content for her. She was able to communicate but couldn't remember the birth dates of her sons, the names of her pets, the names of her friends, where they went to college, the foundational elements of her life. We dropped it into Cerego. She's been on the system for about 5 months, studies everywhere. She was back in the hospital for a little while and she was on Cerego, loves the application. Colonel Ziesman is able to see data on his mobile phone that shows how much time she spent. She was active yesterday, how many items she's learned, and exactly what's going on with her, which is awesome. He can also tell what items are difficult for her. We've just completed a bit of a story about that. If you take a picture with your mobile phone of that URL, you can read about Missy's story, but it's just a remarkable story of one woman recovering her memory. In my remaining 16 seconds, I'll leave you with 3 thoughts. You bring the content, we provide the technology. We are not replacing the instructor, but we are an AI-driven companion to ensure that soldiers learn your content faster, remember longer. Little and often is the magic recipe for success. Cerego brings evidence-based science to life, especially on mobile devices. And success is a journey, not a destination. The goal of training is not to pass a test. The goal should be to have learners build and maintain foundational knowledge and instructors gaining key insights about their underlying capabilities. And that's it. Thank you. You can contact me at aslcerego.com. We're looking for groups that want to pilot with us. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Andrew. I think at the end of a long day, all of us could use some of that, and especially the Surgeon General. What's her name? All right, here comes the panel. So General Line reminded me that he and the panel are what stands between you and the Riverwalk. All right? No challenge there whatsoever, but we're happy to wrap up a great day of conversation with one last great panel. This panel is titled Army Medicine Force Modernization and the Joint Force in support of multi-domain operations. The panel chair, as mentioned, is Major General Brian Line, Commanding General of the United States Army Medical Department Center and School, and our moderator for today is Herb Coley, United States Army retired President, Army Medical Museum Foundation. Gentlemen, off to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate the introduction. I want to make sure that you did hear that this is the last panel of the day. If you were looking for the seminar on how to make flavored beverages with umbrellas in them, you're in the wrong room. That's going to be held down in the lobby area at 1730. General Lyon, when he gave me guidance, and oh, by the way, General Lyon's been giving me guidance since he was the commander of Evans Army Community Hospital. So I'm familiar with the guidance that he's given me over the years. He told me that he wanted me to be very brief with regard to introductions of the panel, except for him, except for his introduction. But I'm going to take that guidance like I took much of the other guidance he gave me over the years, and just kind of tell you that we're fortunate today to have 3 gentlemen who while their areas of concentration have been different, their experiences are very much the same. They've all commanded at all levels, from company to flag level commands. They're all combat veterans, as you can see by their uniforms. If Mr. Bailey were wearing his uniform, you would see that he is a proud holder of our nation's, of the Army's highest award, and that would be the Master Army Aviator Badge. So now I know that there are going to be slides up on each side of the room here as you're seeing it. So I'm going to zero in on all the aviators that I know in the group, and when their lips stop moving, I'll know that they've had a chance to have read the slides. So without any further ado, General Lyon, I think you told me to turn it over to you, right? Was that about 30 seconds?
You did awesome, Herb. Thanks. Hey, thanks everybody. So how we're going to do this, I'm going to go over the overarching vision of the multi-domain battle concept. And then I've asked Colonel Godfrey from the Sustainment Center of Excellence to look at the functional operational concept of sustainment as it ties into the multi-domain battle. And then Tom Bailey is going to talk to us about medical, which then is nested in sustainment and nested in elsewhere. So next slide, please. Keep going. Okay. So back in 1973, there was the Yom Kippur War, and it was the biggest tank battle since World War II. And we learned a lot of things from that Yom Kippur War. There was a huge amount of knowledge on the battlefield where we actually took, the United States Army took a 2-star general, General Starry, and flew him over to Israel to learn the lessons learned of that, brought that back, and actually stood up training and doctrine command, and then developed the air-land battle doctrine of how it is that we trained, equipped, manned, and forced our Army. And that all kind of came to fruition in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and then OIF and the Road to Baghdad, which were not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but clearly demonstrated that by turning a concept into doctrine and then getting everybody on the same sheet of music, we were able to deliver overwhelming combat power where it needed to be on the battlefield of the future. But over the last 15 to 20 years or so, our adversaries and our enemies have been studying the air-land battle doctrine and looking at how we've fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, looking at how we fought in Somalia, looking at how we fought elsewhere, and realized that there are gaps in our capability to deliver ultimate combat power, ground combat power, wherever the National Command Authority needs us. And so the gaps and shortfalls that we identified, and the adversaries taking notes and looking at how potential adversaries are executing in Ukraine and elsewhere, has led to the development of, next slide, the multi-domain battle, which is really taking the Army and taking our military to the next step, where we've got to understand the warfighting challenges, the gaps that we've had to identify, that we took a critical look between training and doctrine command and elsewhere and said, all right, where are we not achieving synergy on the battlefield? Where are we not battlefield dominant? And so we came up with 20 warfighting challenges. And in the discussion of those warfighting challenges then came into the multi-domain battle of the future, which really is a concept of how it is that we're going to be fighting. And we'll get into a little bit more of that because in here are some huge gaps and capability shortfalls, both within sustainment and within medicine. And you heard some of that discussion earlier today, but we're talking significant prolonged battlefield evacuation, interrupted lines of communication, significantly distributed forces, huge logistical tails, how it is that we're going to provide medical and logistical support, repair, and maintenance on the move in the battlefield of the future. And so out of the air-land battle came the big five, all right? So it was the M1A2 or the M1 tank, it was the Bradley fighting vehicle, it was the Apache, it was helicopters and ground combat systems, and the Patriot. So those were the big five. And so out of this multi-domain battle has come really the big 6+1. And the last group really touched on the +1. When they're talking about the human dimension, but we're talking about soldier, team, performance, and overmatch is the +1. But it's along the same lines: the combat vehicles, cross-domain fires, advanced protection, expeditionary mission command, cyber and electromagnetic, robotics and autonomous systems, and then, like I said, the soldier and team performance and overmatch. Next slide, please. And so each one of the centers of excellence had to come up with these functional concepts. And so Us together, the AMED Center and School Health Readiness Center of Excellence, along with the Sustainment Center of Excellence, really helped develop the functional concept for sustainment on the battlefield. Army medicine, however, is integral in multiple functional concepts. So the main one, and the one that's really been our advocate and our proponent at TRADOC, has been the Sustainment Center of Excellence. But we've worked with Mission Command Center of Excellence, Maneuver Center of Excellence, and multiple other centers of excellence. But the main functional concept that we're really focused on is nesting the multi-domain battle and our shortfalls and our gaps within the Sustainment Center of Excellence. Next slide, please. And so that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Colonel Godfrey. Thanks so much for coming here from the Sustainment Center of Excellence to kind of give us an overview of the areas that we've been working on, the shortfalls, and some opportunities that we have for improvement on the battlefield.
Thanks, sir. And again, I really appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of the last panel of the day, and I appreciate that. No, in all seriousness, as General Lyons said, as we looked at multi-domain battle, as we assessed the Army functional concept for movement and maneuver, it really drove how we looked at sustainment. So as General McFarland this morning and General Lyon just now, how do we look at this complex environment? How do we look at the operating environment? And how do we perform our mission, which is enable the warfighter through readiness, sustainment, and those opportunities for them to exploit those windows of opportunity to go out and kill the enemy. So what we looked at was our 4 lines of effort you can see on the chart, which was pretty much how do we sustain semi-independent operations. So you can see there in the actual line, that is what we look at as those gaps. How do we meet the required capabilities, which is the blocks on the right. So I'm not going to discuss every single point, and I think that may generate some questions out there. But what I would like to highlight is our current force structure. In order to get at ample duration of 7 days of supply or enable those BCTs to be semi-independent, we're going to have to look at demand reduction. And I know that's a, kind of, an evil word to say right now, but the convoy to support a BCT for 7 days of supply is approximately 22 miles at 50-meter intervals. So you can't protect that. You can't maintain that. You can't sustain that. So we're going to have to look at future forces and how we do demand reduction. The other opportunities are autonomous capabilities. So we talked earlier about autonomous medevac. Are we ready for that? Are the policies in place? Are we as soldiers able to put that soldier in autonomous medevac and make sure that they get back? But there's also convoy implications, leader-follower, the opportunity to have driverless trucks. And we've actually had tests out there which were about 50,000 miles is what we've logged so far out in the woods of Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, with great success. The other thing that we'd like to highlight is dispersed sustainment operations. So as we mass those sustainment footprints, we also create what the enemy likes to call a target-rich area. So how do we do that? How do we mass sustainment effects without massing sustainment units? So we talked about multiplicity earlier, those capabilities throughout the battlefield. How do we create that synergy to where we can maximize those sustainment effects without putting all of the sustainment assets in one location? And then also point of need. So additive manufacturing, how we look at being able to have a computer system or a system that is able to 3D print that bracket as opposed to waiting it to go from node to node to node to the point of need. How do we test those capabilities? How do we ensure that that bracket or that part that we're able to manufacture at the point will actually pass and be certified on what weapon system? So as our policy is updated, as it keeps up with technology. So sustained semi-independent operations. So we go to enabled mission commands. So shared understanding. So I'm not going to ask because I don't think there'd be too many hands in the room who were actually able to use BCS3 with great success. So we went to MCOP. Now we're moving to Army COP. our Army Readiness COP. So how do we utilize our systems that we currently have in place to enable those commanders to make the decision? So as a Division G forum, my division commander said, you know, Jim, I fight battalions, so I want to know where I'm looking at as far as my readiness for battalions. So mission readiness on his combat platforms, his personnel, so as I worked with the G1, as well as the fuel and the ammo, were they all in the right spots? So how do we create that common operating picture as it comes from the system or the source of record to be able to provide that commander the opportunity to make that decision when it needs to be made? And then predictive and analytics. So back in the day, we all, as young logisticians, and I apologize for using the word logisticians, but we were able to identify what resources or what sustainment assets we needed by phase line. So we grew into stockpile logistics. We now have 30 days of supply in a FOB mentality when we need to get back to how do we train young soldiers, how are we training the logistics officers on this is how far a tank can move on his fuel in his tank versus how much fuel do I need to take him on, whether he's doing decisive action or whether he's doing a defensive action. So we are looking at those tools as we build them into our ERP systems. And then protection and sustainment in the operating environment. So GEM interoperability. So US, UK, as we do exercises with our UK partners, our communication systems, so being the US and the Army, we barely are able to talk to the Marine Forces and the Air Forces when it comes to our systems communications. So as we work towards our coalition, we have a lot of work to do. And system information vulnerability. So most of our systems are in the open. So how do we defend against cyber? So as we look at hardening those systems, so our transportation systems, our maintenance systems, how do we communicate in a way that we can encrypt that, or how do we communicate as we go out to our vendors, as we communicate as we go out to the wholesale system, how do we incorporate that into our protection of our force? And then again, I kind of briefly cover remastering of camouflage and concealment. But again, electronic signatures. So as you look at our electronic signal that we put out there in a lot of the sustainment nodes, I mean, it looks like Las Vegas at night. It's lit up. So how do we get control of doing that discipline that we've kind of lost the art of? And then the fourth one, I'm actually gonna turn it over to Tom Bailey to discuss that. So I'll turn it over to you, Tom.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon. I'd like to dovetail a little bit about what Jim just said. And the way we come up with what we're looking at is then we use gaps. We use the Army campaign of learning from the Army operating system. We use the Army warfighting challenges and how the Army fights. And we come up with what our documented gaps are. And in the Army, there's over 1,100 gaps right now. And we have 11 medical ones within the top 100. We have one that's extremely high risk, and we have 10 others that are high risk, and the others are medium and low risk.
Next slide.
Is it working? So that's the way we come up with what we see. We use the Army campaign of learning as the major thing to determine what we have. We've identified a bunch of gaps, and you can see them up here. And our top a few I'd like to talk about in the middle thing of some of our medical challenges. What we're going to be seeing under the multi-domain battle concept is different than what we saw in the last 16 or 17 years. It's going to be different than what we saw in Vietnam. You're going to be going farther back towards what we did in World War II. You're going to see extremely violent kinetic actions out there, which means a lot of casualties. If you look at the there's 7 scenarios that we use to develop our estimates and everything and what we do to learn here. And in one of the 7 where we go towards near peer and peer competitors, you see approximately 10,000 casualties in a 24-hour period in the first day. 10,000 casualties, about 2,000 are KIA, and the rest of them we're going to have to deal with. And that's something that we're just not used to. It's not going to be like OIF. It's not going to be like OEF. We're going to be able to call in the medevac, and it's going to be able to get there right away and everything. We're going to have to keep them a long time. We're going to have prolonged care. We're going to have to use ground evacuation. We're going to have different type of injuries. Like General McFarland was talking today, he alluded to mega cities. You're going to see crushing injuries, a lot of stuff that we haven't seen before. And we don't know fully what we're going to see yet because we're still doing the campaign of learning. And part of that is multi-domain battle concept. In January of this year, the Army and Navy signed a white paper on it of what it's going to be. Since then, there's been a lot of comments on it, and the next step is by the end of September is the Army and TRADOC is going to be coming out with the Army concept for multi-domain battle. Now, we are intertwined, and we work with on a daily basis with SCOE and the other Center of Excellences, but we still don't know exactly what it's going to be. So we're working at one of the big gaps that we have, and General Lyon asked me to identify a few of the gaps and what our solutions are. One of the biggest gaps we have, obviously, is prolonged care. And what have we done for, to keep a casualty a lot longer? What have we done for that? We've come up with expeditionary medic, and that's a good concept. I know the sergeant majors are going to talk more about that tomorrow morning, but it's a different type of medic. An expeditionary medic, he's going to have to be up on TC3, primary care, force health protection. Or force health protection. A lot of stuff like that. We've also looked at it for prolonged care we reorganized the forward surgical team into the forward resuscitative surgical team. And now in OIF and OEF, we used to split the team into two 10-man sections or 10-person sections, and they weren't identical. It wasn't made, it wasn't designed to split into two sections. The new FRST is designed to split into two, and you have two identical sections. And you will also have options in there to move it down to 6 people, move out and do different things. So we do have some successes in that area. TC3 with General Brown, when he was up at CAC, he was a champion of that, and we moved quite a way in assisting the TC3 with the Mystics, and that's gone quite a way to solve that gap. We also have patient evacuation. Very large gap in the air and the ground. With multi-domain battle, you're going to see, as you heard earlier from General McFarland this morning, we're going to have windows where we're going to be able to move. We're not going to be able to call in a 9 line and get that medevac in right away. We may have to wait 2 or 3 days. And what does that mean? We may have to do more ground evacs, a lot more ground evacs. We're not used to doing ground evacs. We're not used to doing ambulance exchange points. We haven't done that in years. So we're going to have to be doing that. We're also going to have to be doing surges. By surges, I mean when we get that 3 to 5 hour window where we're going to be able to do something where we have air parity, during that 3 to 5, we're going to have to put every medevac bird in the air. We're going to have to do CASEVAC. We're going to have to do ground evac. We're going to have to be restructuring non-standard evacuation. It's going to be a lot of things that we're going back to 30 years ago during the Cold War era. So there's going to be a lot of those kind of things. And it's going to be extremely violent is what we feel with the new types of weapon systems out there. Another one was the tactical combat casualty care. One of our solution sets to that was the expeditionary medic, the forward resuscitative surgery team. We're also the TC3, we talked about it. We're working with our brothers. We have an embedded Australian and we have a UK officer, one a physician, one a MSc. And we do, every 6 months, we have meetings with the Canadians, New Zealanders, Australians, and and the British are in there, and we do joint exercises. And they were involved in the last Army warfighting experiment in Fort Bliss last December. There's a lot more. We deal in short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions. And we're exploring things about large capacity ground evacuation and air evacuation assets. We're looking at one of the main gaps is on ground evacuation. Do we have ground evacuation? We don't have a medical variant right now that can keep up with the battle. They're looking at the protected vehicle. We're looking at an LMTV type. It still hasn't been solidified. There's a lot of issues that we're working on this. Hospitalization, we're looking at reorganizing some units. As you know, the field hospital came out. That started in 2018. It came to fruition, the design and everything, in about 2014. It was approved, and pretty soon it's going to be fielded. The first one is this summer. I believe it's the 10th cache with the 32-bed field. General Lyon has asked us, is that modular enough? Do we have an early entry capability for that? Because right now it's 32 beds. That's the way it goes out the door. So one of the things we're looking at in the next 3 to 4 months is, can we come up with like a 10-bed early entry medical capability, a hospital, something in between an FRST and a 32-bed. So there's a lot of those types of things that we're working on. And we're also looking at moving more medical assets. Potentially, the campaign of learning may show us that we have to move more medical assets into the brigades. Not the medical brigades, but the BCTs. Because if they're going to be there for 7 days on their own, you're going to need probably some more medical, and we're looking at that. But then you're straddling the fence. More medical, but at the same time you have demand reduction, which they want us to get, smaller on, our footprint. So it's one of those give and takes, and it's going to take a while, but we're involved in every one of the exercises to figure it out. And I think the last thing I'd like to say is I think we're going to have to remember the overwhelming casualties. I think we're going to have to remember it's not an OEF situation. We're not going to be doing FOBs. What they're talking about is every 3 to 4 hours we're going to have to move. How do you move every 3 to 4 hours if you have NBC casualties? How do you do that with our NBC system? It's something we're wrestling with right now. But I think we're going to have a new way of thinking on how we practice. And that's all I have, sir.
So I got a few questions, and I think there's a couple more that are out in the field. First one is, since it's hard to replicate the type of injuries in the battlefield for surgeons to gain trauma experience, how can artificial intelligence assist with virtual surgery, and are there any content for any users? So I can answer that, and Tom, I'll turn it over to you as well. So we're at the infancy of using artificial intelligence to create this capability. There's a center out at Fort Leavenworth right now that they use virtual reality, and they actually have cockpits out there, and they have frames of armored vehicles out there, and they use virtual reality tied to that. And so imagine in the not too distant future, we take data from the joint trauma system, we take cases directly out of the joint trauma system, and we give everybody the virtual reality glasses that we saw earlier, and we use the haptic technology that's tied into gloves. And so the whole team is presented with a virtual patient or a virtual mass casualty. Unlike what happens now where people show up with miles cards and they show up with other things. Imagine you're immersed in a virtual environment of stuff that is immediately available off of the battlefield. And the General Gervais is working on this right now. She's actually done this for some of the sustainment pieces out at Leavenworth, where they're able to get after this. So I think that within the next 3 to 5 years, the capability is going to be there. If you look, the Chinese already have a artificial intelligence system for medical providers, where they can be presented a case and then using artificial intelligence with direct lab feeds, visual and haptic glove technology that you can do that. That's never going to replace the anxiety and the stress of a real patient bleeding to death in front of you, but the closer that you can get to virtual reality, I think the better off that we're going to be. This goes into the live virtual gaming and constructive model that the previous chief and the current chief is asking us to get towards in terms of using artificial intelligence to help the team.
I think it's an interesting time too. Something along the same lines as last month we sent one of our physicians and dentists out to Fort Bragg, and USASOC is exploring this right now, something along the lines with 18 deltas and potentially PAs to do surgery from a distance. And I think this goes hand in hand. I think it's going to be opening up, and we're definitely going to be participating with the studies that we see to see where this is going. And we really don't know. There's so many unknowns out there right now. It's hard to predict into the future.
Yeah, I really appreciate your sending these questions up to us. For a while there, I was thinking I was going to have to read General Lyon's bio to you guys. So that's it's good we're getting the questions.
We all are all short of sleep. So, yeah, unfortunately, Jim knows me very well, which is why he's going to be stationed over in England for yet another year. So this is for Colonel Godfrey and myself. Why are we maintaining a medevac aircraft? The future fight will require rapid, innovative solutions that are time-sensitive and situationally dependent. Why wouldn't we move towards a more flexible rotary wing platform that can support multiple operational missions? Why wouldn't we move to CASEVAC? And so I'll let you go, and then I'll provide my thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, due to this fiscal or the financial restrictions that we're in, where do we develop and where do we pour our money into? And when we look at it, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be mission effectiveness for, destroying something. And unfortunately, as we rack and stack things, sometimes things that we think is important based on, like Tom said, with the capability gap assessments, sometimes it doesn't come out that way. But I think you're right, though. We need to look at something that's more agile, that's something that is, easier to maintain and more accessible for the soldier. Really, unfortunately, I can't add that much to it. I'm not really well versed in that, to be perfectly honest with you. But I mean, it is a good question, and sir, I'm not sure if you can.
So, the whole reason that we have medevac and the whole reason that we're working towards ground treatment, not just a ground evacuation vehicle, is that we're going to have to provide treatment on the move. You can't do that in a CASEVAC environment where you don't have a dedicated medical person, be it a 68 Whiskey or a Whiskey 1 or a critical care flight paramedic or a critical care nurse that is available for that platform when that platform takes off. We're not going to be able to provide that level of care on the battlefield, especially if you're looking at that multi-domain battle where it could be 12, 14, 16 hours from point of injury until they get into a semi-fixed roll 3, which may be several hundred kilometers away or may be afloat. And if you don't have the capability of providing en-route care, or we rely on CASEVAC with a just-in-time medical asset that hasn't worked together, that doesn't have the inherent medical sets, kits, and outfits, oxygen concentrators, blood capability, blood storage capability, advanced resuscitative capability, rapid rewarming capability that we have that's being built into the ground medical evacuation variant and is inherent in the medevac bird, we can never go away from that until we truly get to an autonomous vehicle with robotics that provide that virtual reality and capability. So I think, for the near term and the intermediate term, we've got to have dedicated air medical evacuation, and then we really have to work towards a medical treatment on the move ground vehicle, because right now we don't have that capability. Nobody has that capability. None of our countries have that capability. We have a ground evacuation vehicle, which is no better than basically my Ford F-150, because once that vehicle gets put into drive, that medic's holding on for dear life and really can't do anything on the move. And doctrine and conditions necessitate stopping the vehicle to provide en-route care. And so we've got to be able to provide ground en-route care, otherwise we're going to be losing casualties. Colonel Godfrey, with the current KIA and wounded in action estimates being so large and the fight being principally fought in mega cities in the future, which inherently will generate a large number of NEO requirements, what planning is being done to think through the transportation requirements during the critical phases of war in mobilization and deployment?
Okay. As we talk about multi-domain battle, so transportation, those road networks, who manages the support area? So as we talked about, the deep, the close, the rear, that we had those identified delineations on who kind of manages that. So as we look at multi-domain battle, it can happen all around you. So you're exactly right. As far as the security domain, the intel domain, how are you aware of what my windows of opportunity to be able to conduct that casualty evacuation or to conduct those transportation missions to, stop movement sustainment forward or backhauling retrograde, but actually conducting those CASEVAC operations. So that's something where the shared understanding and that situational awareness for every leader all the way down to the squad leader in order to affect that requirement.
So the next two are kind of interlinked, so I'm going to combine two questions, and if I don't answer them, you can come up and either beat me up afterwards or we can go in further depth. But it's dealing with sustainment of the 68 whiskeys and the physician's assistant. How do we sustain our pre-hospital medical training for the 68 whiskeys? They're currently not involved in medical care while in garrison. Life-saving interventions are tested in TC8-800 annually, but is this enough? Most 68 whiskeys never see patients except when deployed. And then the backbone of forward medical care has been the physician's assistant, yet the nature of the physician assistant has changed. No longer are the PA ranks dominated by experienced former medics. Is there a plan to increase the capability of the Army physician's assistant? I think that gets into the whole, this has been the Surgeon General's primary focus since she took over as the Surgeon General. Literally, every time that I've heard her speak is we've got to be ready to go into harm's way. And if our military treatment facilities are not dual-use platforms as training facilities for the faculty that are working in there, then we need to change our military treatment facilities. They are not health delivery platforms for the benefit. That's a second-order piece of our military treatment facilities. Our requirement is not the delivery of the benefit. Our requirement is the fact that we wear an Army uniform or a Navy or an Air Force uniform, and our nation is going to call on us tomorrow to go into harm's way. And we can't say we're not ready. And so it doesn't really matter that the physician's assistant used to be a finance officer, or it used to be 68 Delta. The requirement for that person, so they're getting better trained right now than they were 15 years ago. They're getting masters. They got 2 years, 3 years of the program right now. Now, they may not be the best mentors for those junior medics, but those senior medics that are in those formations better be mentors for those junior medics and also mentoring that physician's assistant on how to run a battalion aid station. We also have to get back to the battalion aid station and away from the soldier-centered medical homes and allowing people to train their own in their footprint with the equipment that they're going to go to war with. You're not going to war with the stuff that's in the soldier-centered medical home. You're going to war with the stuff that's in your battalion aid station, and if you don't take that out until you go to NTC or JRTC, you're wrong. And that's the same thing with 68 whiskeys. And I know Sergeant Major Ecker has been primary focus of this, and looking forward to Sergeant Major Gregg to continue to carry the water. 68 whiskey is sitting in a sleep lab watching somebody sleep at night. They're of no value added to our Army. They've got to be trained and they've got to be ready to go. And so we've got to use our military treatment facilities. We must leverage the Mystics, the medical simulation training centers, as a readiness training platform, as a combat range, just like an M16 range or an M4 range. That range, those Mystics should be our medical training ranges that we're getting after. And when they're in the hospital, I challenge each one of the physicians and nurses to allow them to work to the optimum of their capability. And there are processes in place, and we've got some great hospitals doing great things, like Fort Bragg and Madigan have really got some phenomenal training programs for their 68 whiskeys. And then we've got others that haven't really bought into that yet. And we've really got to focus on the 68 whiskey.
This is a kind of a similar question.
Follow on, so same thing. The bulk of this discussion has mainly been focused on platforms and devices with the exception of the expeditionary medic. What are we doing to increase the skill, proficiency of the required providers, ERPA, CRNA, and trauma surgeons? So for Mr. Bailey and myself. So, you know, this is a direct follow-on question to that. And this gets after all the discussions that we've had today. And if you're sticking around for the end of the week, I guarantee you this is exactly the same thing we're talking at CTL-DTS, is our readiness capability to go into harm's way. And we've got some places that are doing it great, and we've got some other places that are where we're challenged. And this is really an area that we've got to focus on within military medicine, and using the NDAA recommendations to our benefit. So partnering with the VA, opening our doors to complex patients, opening our doors to challenging patients, embedding our military personnel down in civilian hospitals downtown, partnering like we have here in San Antonio with the trauma consortium that we've got here in South Shack, where we're training in UT Health Sciences Center and we're training in our facility, so we're able to get the complex caseload and getting everybody out there. And what General Crossland had set up, or was setting up at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt University. 30 miles away, you got an 86 combat support hospital, so get them down to Vanderbilt and allow them to practice in a level 1 trauma center that is seeing complex care all the time. And what we're looking at in some of our national partners in Tegucigalpa and elsewhere in Africa, to try and embed our surgical teams and our capability into facilities. So this is an area that we've been talking about a lot, and an area that I think we've got to focus on even more. The pendulum swung a lot towards the delivery of the healthcare benefit. And we've got to make sure that that delivery of the healthcare benefit is focused on readiness. And if it's not focused on readiness, then we've got to really question why it is that we're delivering that benefit in place of our readiness requirement, because that benefit can be taken care of by our TRICARE partners in every place except for maybe Fort Polk and Fort Irwin. And what we do every single day in our military treatment facilities and our dental treatment facilities and our veterinary treatment facilities and our public health units has got to be focused on our go-to-war skills. And if it's not, then we got to question why it is that we're doing that. Well,
I have nothing to add, sir.
I'll try and be a little bit more passionate, sir. Can you discuss Space Command plans and plans for protection of intel and GPS satellites from predatory destructive satellites? Jim, that's yours, man.
No, not in this environment. I can't. Sorry, no. To be perfectly honest with you, I think we're just starting to get our feet wet on that one. How do we jam? How do we create our opportunities or those windows? So as we jam the enemy, the electromagnetic spectrum, I think they're really starting to gain on what it is they are able to do, what they're able to, or what they want to do, versus what they're capable of now. So I would say it's kind of in its infancy stages. I'm sure that probably doesn't answer your question, but I can't get to the technical details of probably what you're looking for.
Okay, this is for the group. Where is it? Yeah, so, and so I'd ask for you to answer this from the sustainment, but Tom, if you could talk to this from the medical. To what extent are we going to be expected to rely on host nation and gym partners logistics change in a future operating environment, what capabilities will be more important than others for our gym partners?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, so at CASCOM, we're actually doing what we call the US-UK interoperability session. So we've actually had opportunities for the British to come over, participate in tabletop exercise, identify what capability sets they have, where we could tap into. So as the Army, we always lean forward with our shoulder and say, follow us, you know, we'll be the lead integrator. But there are opportunities, and we have to identify what capabilities our coalition partners provide and how we can tap into that resources. So host nation, so as we talk about security in the rear area, you know, there's going to be folks there that can provide sustainment. There's going to be, you know, units that can provide for their own medical. There's going to be units that can provide for a whole host of operations. So we have to identify what those capabilities are and where we can utilize and capitalize on their abilities.
But from our side of the fence, recently, within the last 2 months, we ran a medical logistics summit, and we had representatives from all over the Army medical logistics there. And we're trying to develop under multi-domain battle. What exactly are we going to have to do from the medical logistics side? And we ran that for about 4 days. We had an outbrief, and now the next step, what we're doing is we're going into the capabilities-based assessment process on that. We did have a representative from the UK there, and we also had our Australian partner too. So we're looking at that hard, and we hope to see something in the next 6 months to give you more fidelity on that.
Great. How are we working with our industry partners to get them mobilized to increase production of all classes of supply, especially in the light of DLA's inability to support days 9 through 30 and potentially longer for resupply?
Well, for a while, we were not creating demands. And I think that led to a problem with the supply chain. And I see General McCuistion there, and she commanded DLA Land and Maritime, so I know she probably wants to add a few words to that. No, okay. But what we're doing is, as we provide that demand data, as we look at what our demand rates are, we utilize the CTC rotation. So our ASLs, are they correct? Are they supporting us in those BCT operations? Or are there readiness drivers that we're not getting after? So we provide that data directly to DLA. We provide that data directly to the Army, or the Army collects it. But we're more integrated when it comes to those strategic partners. So no longer is mom and pop, you know, reliance on the mom and pop type vendors, but who can actually provide that part in a critical time to provide it to the supply system. So yes, we are looking at it. The Army has actually done great strides in getting the demand readiness as well as the readiness drivers to improve, as well as customer satisfaction rates. So I think we are moving in the right direction when it comes to the demand analysis and the supply planning.
Yeah, I think we got to look not just at DLA, but we got to look at some autonomous 3D printing. So look at the combat support or the field hospital, combat support hospital, and all the sets, kits, and outfits that you got to carry in there for just the operating room. Imagine if you had a 3D printer that printed the surgical instruments in a matter of minutes, and then you were able to dispose of them rather than sterilization. You could eliminate Big Bertha, you could eliminate Little Bertha, you could eliminate 45 of the things if you had a 3D printer that immediately printed the capability, and then you just ground it all back up and reprinted this stuff. And we're actually working towards that capability, both from the logistics side. So they're making tools right now out of a 3D printer, so the big old toolboxes that you used to have that people would leave on the side of the road, now you don't have to worry about that because they'll do immediate 3D printing of these devices, and they actually making hand grips for the M4 out of a 3D printer rather than having that huge logistic chain of supply. So I think there's lots of things that industry is working on and that we're working on in the military to get after that. To increase patient survivability in the field, would there be value in using interactive telemedicine and VTC collaboration back to specialists out of theater for consultative and diagnostics, especially on mobile secure devices via satellite 3G and 4G. You know, we've proven that over the last 10 to 12 years with behavioral health in the battlefield as part of the mental health assessment team that went into theater. We identified that virtual behavioral health is as effective as face-to-face behavioral health. And so instead of, and in Afghanistan, we could never provide enough behavioral health people on each one of these micro FOBs and places like that. But if you have a computer and you're able to talk face-to-face, we were able to significantly decrease the numbers of soldiers that were evacuated out of the battlefield and evacuated back to Landstuhl and elsewhere. There are units right now in the United States, special operations units and some in the White House and elsewhere, they're already using virtual telemedicine capabilities where ophthalmologic diagnosis is being done, dermatologic diagnosis is being done. We've been doing this with radiology for 30 years. Where we've been sending digital films. So right now at Brooke Army Medical Center, right across the street, they're reading films from Sotokano Air Base. You know, it's not like they have to ship them and put them in the back of a plane. We're using that virtual capability right now. My son's a huge whitewater kayaker, and he's able to go whitewater kayaking with a GoPro camera on the top of his head and post it on Facebook Live, and I can see him kayaking right now. We should have that same capability for our medics on the battlefield of the future to phone a friend if they're in above their head and have that capability. When you saw President Obama and Secretary Clinton sitting in a room in someplace within the national capital region looking at what was happening when Osama bin Laden was killed, what do you think they were looking at? Yeah, so there's a capability already inherent within the United States military to allow that capability through secure networks. And so there should be no problem with a complete hands-free device that our medics and our physician's assistants can use and bring forward on the battlefield to then call up Walter Reed, Brooke Army Medical Center, Madigan Army Medical Center, somebody back here in the United States and say, hey, what do I do with this? And it should be able to be a two-way conversation. The capability exists commercial off the shelf right now. If you got a GoPro camera and you got a cell phone, you can go on Facebook Live and see it right now. We get all tied up in all the cyber and all the rest of the security stuff, but we can solve that. We can't let that be the hindrance. We've got to use the capability that's available right now, commercial off the shelf, and say, hey, how do we make that applied to military medicine? All right, last couple of questions. Future something of Compo 2-3 medical units for the future fight.
That was written by a doctor. That's why you can't read it.
That was written. Well, is there a nurse here that can read doctor's handwriting? So the future training of Compo 2-3. You know, for the last 15 years or so, our Compo 2-3 has been given a 2 to 3 to 4 year heads up that they're going to war. And they've had 2 to 3 to 4 years oftentimes to train up to get ready to go into harm's way. And that's going to have to be significantly changed, especially for medical, since 3/4 of our medical stuff is in Compo 2-3. And that we're going to have to use what we talked about earlier, some virtual capabilities, some artificial intelligence, some of our remote capabilities, because you may have a surgeon that's in Iowa with an OR tech that's in Colorado, that's with an anesthesia care provider in Utah, and you can't wait for them to get to theater to train together. So using some of these virtual live and constructive capabilities where people can dial in together so that when they do come for their drill weekends or their 2 weeks a year, that we've got that set up and getting after that. You can talk to the logistics piece of how, some of the challenges that you're seeing from the Compo 2, 3, because you have a lot of sustainment in Compo.
Yeah, we have 80%. So as part of Army Warfighting Challenge 16, we're actually able to identify some approximately 9 SRCs that we require at a higher level of readiness. So equipping personnel in order to, as we set the theater, as we move in, to utilize them. So as you look at the mobilization times, as you look at the how long we can have them over there, it plays big. So we were able to identify, like I said, 9 SRCs to get them to a higher readiness rate in order to provide that vital mission.
From a medical perspective, we had the ARF-PIC last week, and one of the big focuses of the ARF-PIC was actually medical. These were the line Compo 2, Compo 3, who said, hey, medical people and medical training was their #1 requirement. And that's what they briefed out to the acting Secretary of the Army. So we got the signal loud and clear that this can't be a Compo 1 solution. And the Chief of Staff of the Army has said this again and again and again. We are one Army. This has got to be a one Army system, a one Army solution. We're not a 480 or 490 man Army. We're a 1.018 million person Army, and everybody's going to have to be ready to go. And we can't have differing standards based upon your Compo level, because, especially in the medical community, when 3/4 of our assets are in the Compo 2, Compo 3, something hits the fan tomorrow, we can't wait for the time that it's going to take to bring these units together and train up. I've heard several speakers today talk about pushing medical capability far forward, and I would ask the logistics as well. Typically, more capability forward incurs vulnerability based on proximity to the enemy and a sustainment burden. Can you share some thoughts on balancing the need for care forward and logistics forward versus the potential for loss of not easily replaced medical assets and the additional logistics burden to the maneuver formation?
Yeah, I would look at it more as reducing the size of the sustainment nodes, not necessarily reducing the sustainment. So as you look at, instead of having the Iron Mountain, you kind of spread it around. As the base cluster concept is, you have them multiplicity in the enabled sustainment effect. So it's more of kind of spreading your assets out as opposed to having them all in one location.
And from a medical perspective, we're not talking about putting a surgeon in every foxhole. It's giving the capability through advanced training, the enhanced combat or the expeditionary combat medic that we're looking towards, by giving more capability to the individual far forward, not necessarily pushing everything far forward. But we've also got to look at how we task organize. And I know that this has come up before, but we've forgotten how to task organize for the last 15 years. Because we're a con ops based Army that we fall in on, this is exactly what you're allowed to bring in the theater, you're falling in on equipment, and you don't have to do any of the planning because somebody else did that for you, and here's your con op. We should be able to task organize and provide capability far forward on the battlefield through planning with the assets that we've got. We don't need to continue to change what it is that we've got. But this really gets after the training of the physician's assistant, training of the far forward medic, and using virtual capability. I mean, the Special Operations Command have asked us to look at training their physician's assistants within the Special Operations medical units to do advanced surgical care on the battlefield. And that's a concept that we've got to take a look at on how it is that we give them the capability to provide advanced resuscitative care for a hole somewhere between here to here that you can't put a tourniquet on and you can't put, quick clot in. It's going to require hands to compress or something to compress or put a plug in a hole that's leaking. And it's leaking vital fluid of blood. And so teaching people how to do that and when to do that and then how to take care of that patient until they get back. That doesn't mean that me as a surgeon and an anesthesia care provider and all have to go forward. we've got to be able to provide that capability forward through virtual capabilities, through telemedicine, and all the rest of that stuff, and advanced training for those people far forward, to then get them back to a node or a cell that's going to be far enough away from the battlefield, where then we can provide that damage control and resuscitative capability to then get them back home. So we got about 10 minutes, so last question. Let me see. So we talked about autonomous medevac. There seems to be a lot of developmental work across the services for unmanned aerial systems. And I'll open this to unmanned aerial system. KMAX, Mule, Dragonfly. How are we going to consolidate and converge / down select onto one system? So
well, I mean, with most things that we do, what is the required capability? So what do we need? So as we look at the requirements determination, so like KMAX, and I think they spoke quite a bit on it this morning, but primarily a sustainment-based platform providing sustainment. I mean, that capability it's similar to what the Army's looking for, but the Army's looking for something that can get up and go and without having a shadow driver, that is a new platform, that is a cargo UAS type, something that is more of a kind of a utility vehicle. So you could do supplies, you could potentially convert it to a medevac system. But primarily, the Army is looking at those 3 different levels of unmanned UAS. So small, that we can deliver parts, small parts, the larger, which is Ares, and not so much what the KMAX is looking to provide.
And so autonomous systems is, I don't know that we're going to down select here in the very near future, and it's going to have to look at, and so medevac or medical evacuation is just one portion of the future unmanned aerial systems that the Army is looking at. And so whatever the medical variant is going to be off of that, we're going to obviously working with PEO Aviation and all the rest of the communities to determine what's the platform going to be, and then what capabilities we need to provide to that, and that comes out of Medical Research and Material Command. It comes out of demand signals from the AMED Center and School, from CDID and lessons learned, and advanced concepts and the gaps and all the rest of that stuff that we get off of the battlefield of the future to drive what unmanned system that we're going to ultimately determine, without getting into a lot of the federal acquisition regulations and all the rest of that stuff. That's basically how we're going to do it, but it'll be probably 5 to 10 years in the future before the Army even selects one, and then we'll have to figure out how it is we develop the medical variant off of that one, because we'll have specialized capabilities that are going to be required, i.e. oxygen delivery, advanced monitoring of the patients, perhaps airway control in the back of this unmanned aerial system. That's going to be much, much more distinct than a flat lift, to pick up and deliver, class 1, class 3, class 9 on the battlefield of the future. So if you listen really softly, you can hear Dirty Nellies calling you. So thanks very much. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks for a great concluding panel to what was a great day. I think it all would agree with that. So many thanks to all the presenters, the Tech 10s, the panelists, the speakers, for a very exciting day. One of the, just to follow up on General Lyon's last comment about autonomous vehicles, so mark your calendars for 7-8 November in Detroit, where AUSA is proud to sponsor a 2-day symposium on robotics and autonomous vehicles. And only at AUSA would we come to San Antonio in July and go to Detroit in November. Maybe next year we'll flip that back and forth. We'll see how that goes. One of the speakers earlier today talked about give me tomorrow. So I'm going to give you tomorrow. All right? The coffee service begins at 7:30. So if you have a rough night on the Riverwalk and need some caffeine, that's a good place to be. The exhibit hall and those great exhibitors that are over there anxious to see you, their doors will open at 0800 tomorrow, and the first of the breakout sessions will begin at 0830. So that's our schedule for tomorrow. 7:30 coffee, 8 o'clock exhibits, 8:30 breakout sessions, and we look for another great day. Before I ask the Surgeon General to wrap us up, I would just say from my perspective, I think today is one of those great days where there's probably more questions than there are answers. But that's kind of the nature of things as we deal with looking into the future of this Army that we know and love. But I would tell you, as somebody who didn't grow up in your tribe, there's nobody else I'd rather have leading this effort than you. The right people have assembled in San Antonio to take on the challenges of Army medicine as we move forward. So thank you for that. Thank you for your thoughtful and provocative questions. Thanks for the sidebar conversations. Thanks for your contribution to make Army medicine better, to make the Army better, and to make our nation better. And please welcome back to the podium to wrap us up the Army's Surgeon General, Lieutenant General West.
All right, thanks so much, sir. I appreciate it. So you switched it there. You were supposed to go after me, but now you want to give me the distinction of being the one that's between the team and the Riverwalk. So thanks a lot, sir. But really, thanks so much. And what a great day. I tell you, those that went through all the presentations probably share my thoughts on what a phenomenal group of presenters that we had and group of panelists that we had. And I'd like to thank you for all the support. And sir, I think this was, from the, really meets or exceeds our wildest expectations. And I went General McQuiston, General Swan, and you, we sat in that room off of the AUSA and said, hey, do you think this would work? And Scott Dingle was there at the time. Who would have thought it would have really come to fruition? And what a great day. And just the first day, I think, if we ended here, which we're not going to, it would have been a great success for what you mentioned. But just want to wrap up a couple things. I'd like to go to the next slide, please. Just stay on this one here. And those of you who remember, that's the slide from my first day brief on the 11th of December 2015 when I took over as the TSG and MedCom commander. And this was a real patient. I asked someone to get a picture because, this is why we exist. I mean, you heard earlier, when General McFarland talked about a couple things. He said, never look down on a medic because you never know when you might be looking up at one. And this embodies that right here. He also said, don't focus on what you do, focus on what you're for. And you've heard me say that before as well. When General Perkins first mentioned to that, I think at one of our CTLDTSs in the past. Because this is really what we're for right here. And, and also say, and I'll kind of steal a term from those of you who went to the same college as me will recognize this, and I partially, modified it, but what keeps a soldier of a free country reliable in battle? There's something else we learn as part of our plebe knowledge, but I would say this, in addition to great leadership, great training, but the fact that they know that if something happens to them, if they're harmed or injured, that they'll have someone, if willing and if alive, someone will be there to render aid in any way that they can. And so it's incumbent upon us to remember that, to remember what makes soldiers of free country, sailors, airmen, Marines reliable, and we're part of that equation, part of why they are. And so we need to make sure that we remain relevant and as much as we can provide the best capability at this point and all the way back throughout through the areas that we have our service members evacuated. So, and a couple other things. You heard General LeCammerer say, basically our job is to maximize combat power of the U.S. Army. That's what we do. Our job is to make sure that we get the warfighter back into the fight, and everything we do should be focused on that. And so when you heard the first panel about medical readiness and support of the total Army and also tomorrow's innovation, keep that in mind. So as you go through and think about some of those things, just emblazon this, this image in your mind. When we balance healthcare delivery with requirements, that's always a very difficult challenge for us because we don't see this every day. This isn't something that we're going to be exposed to necessarily every day, but it should be in our mind. When we talk about the human dimension, optimizing performance, and also making sure we have the cognitive advantage. One of the other things General LaCamera said that it's high touch, not necessarily high tech. We need the high tech, but we're always going to have the high touch as well. I mean, meant it in a different context about knowing your soldiers. But for us in medical, we can get high tech as we want, but it's going to eventually result to a high touch profession. I mean, that's what we're in. We touch people every day. If not physically, we touch them emotionally. We provide comforting, even if it's through virtual means, as was mentioned briefly by Brian just recently, talking about virtual health and virtual behavioral health. You're touching people in a healing way, even though you're not necessarily putting your hands on them. High touch, not high tech. And then we look at modernization for the multi-domain battle. Again, keep this at the front of your mind. So those of you, if you remember, when I first put this out, this was a little bit disturbing. In fact, I modified it a bit because I didn't have one of two at the bottom, because folks thought this was the end of the story. It's like, okay, General West is coming on board, and now this is all that we are focused on. And a lot of members of our team did not see themselves in this photo, because we have a lot of civilians. 70% in some of our facilities, 70% of our staff are valuable Department of the Army civilians or our contractors, and they necessarily didn't see themselves in this. But they are there. And I'd like to go to the next slide, please. And this is the other side of the first slide. We will not get what's on the right side right. We won't get it right taking care of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines at the point of injury if we don't get everything on the left side right. And this was modified because when I first had this on my first day brief, there were like 6 or 7 panels. There were just kind of random areas of things that make up our MedCom. But then I realized I left out some of our individuals. So I went back and tried to find one of every single photo that represents who we are as MedCom. So if we don't get it right in our military treatment facilities, our readiness platforms that are represented on the top, we won't get it right on the right side because we won't be able to have those platforms to train that combat medic or to train those individuals in order to get that right. If we don't have our vets taking care of our military working dogs or individuals checking our water supplies, everything that you see here, our dental professionals, all the things that you see here, AMED Center and School, our researchers, our heroes that wear the puffy white suits. That's their battle rattle, right? All of our laboratory technicians that were saving the day and saving lives for Ebola. If we don't get all of that part right, and that's all of us, that's our civilians, that's our military, that's every single aspect of what we do in Army medicine. If we don't get that right, we will not get this right on the other side. So as we go through the rest of the days of the next day of this forum here, I really want to have you keep both sides of those in the back of your mind on how can we improve in each one of them, because they're interdependent. You can't push on one side without affecting the other, and you can't improve one side without improving the other. And it's a continuous loop and a continuous positive improvement on making sure at the end of the day we get it right, that you heard our line talk about. What's our job here? To make sure that we know what we're for, taking care of the warfighter, making sure they get back to the fight, and making sure that we just take care of all of those entrusted to our care. Because it's, again, if we don't get all of this right, then we shouldn't be wearing this uniform. And so I just want to say thank you, General Ham, for really sponsoring, you and the team for sponsoring this venue for us medical professionals to really take some time out to really think about that, how we can improve all of the things that you see on that slide here, everything that makes up Army medicine, to make sure that we will never let down those who are depending upon us, not only on the battlefield, which is, of course, where we can't fail. We can't fail in any of our missions, but especially not there, but also in every single aspect of what we do and what makes up Army medicine. So thank you so much for your attention here, and look forward to some more exciting discussion tomorrow. So thanks a lot.